But during the fifth drop, which was some 69 feet high, she lost her footing and was sent tumbling over the edge to her demise. Gee, it's almost like the safety restraints were there for a reason.
What it is, guys? It's your boy BlastphamousHD, and today we're here to watch a video you guys sent to me in the DMs. It is called Extremely Embarrassing Ways That People Have Died. The link in the description down below. It's by Be Amazed, not the V Amazed. It sounded similar. Let's do this.
Butt of the joke. I don't often get to pick favorites, but as far as dumb decisions go, this is probably the funniest dumb decision I've ever heard of. Back in 2009 in Pennsylvania, USA, a 17-year-old boy was rushed to A&E after claiming bullies had planted an explosive in his backpack. Obviously, the police were called, but the injuries he sustained...
He was jacking his anus off with a lit firecracker. I know it. I'm like Batman, except black man instead. I'm like, I have all the detective capabilities of the Cape Crusader, except I'm still black. I'm black man off up in this bitch. And my detective abilities and analytical prowesses let me know that that's what he was doing. He was giving himself a chocolate strawberry, and I know that's the truth because I just made up the name of that sex position just now.
Didn't match his story. It was only then that the teen revealed what had actually happened. He'd gone rifling through his grandmother's possessions and found an M80 explosive, an American class of very large firecracker containing some 80 grams of flash powder.
I really hope I'm wrong about how I think he actually died.
They were often used by the U.S. military to simulate grenade explosions, but they were banned for sale in 1966 by the Child Protection Act.
Right.
And we're about to find out why. This idiot had taken the firecracker up to his room and, in a stunningly stupid move, began to repeatedly light and extinguish the fuse. However, during one of these insane cycles, he lit it up and couldn't put it out. Instead of throwing the explosive out of a window or as far away as possible,
he tried to shove it up his anus, hoping his insides would douse out the flame. 3 guys died like that back in the day on an episode of Rescue 911 that I made up in my head. It's the truth, though.
He instead jammed the thing between his thighs and put his hands over it.
What?
Big mistake.
No!
The resulting blast cost him his right hand, right leg, and most of his junk. Meaning while he survived, he lost the ability to reproduce and thus removed any future DNA of his from the gene pool.
Try to massage the inside of his anus with a lit firecracker. Whew, that was close.
I think I just saw Darwin give this story a thumbs up from his grave. Up in flames. There are some jobs that are obviously a little more dangerous than others. And back in 1819, no one had a riskier or more fantastical job than Sophie Blanchard. Also known as Madame Blanchard, she was a French aeronaut and was the first woman to work as a professional balloonist.
So you pussy bitch!
She would ascend in a chair attached to hydrogen balloons to entertain huge crowds of people below her. Well, this was a time before the internet. I guess the French had very limited entertainment options. Sophie would regularly perform in the Tivoli Gardens, sometimes using pyrotechnics called blue light or bingle fire to really spice up her high-flying act. The only problem is that hydrogen is incredibly flammable, and people knew this, regularly warning Sophie about the danger of using pyrotechnics in her shows. But Sophie would not be deterred. And so on the 6th of July, 1819, a particularly gusty day, Sophie ascended. She struck up her fiery display and waved down to the crowds when, all of a sudden, her balloon caught alight. The fire spread quickly, Hindenburg style, and she began to descend rapidly. She seemed calm, but then the wind caught her draft, blowing it out of the gardens and into the side of several nearby buildings.
Oh my God!
Which is when she fell, fatally. Not exactly the blaze of glory she was aiming for, I bet. Can it? It's not often that you guys send me your own stories for this series, but one Be Amazed viewer called Collie Carney got in touch with a tale that definitely deserves a Darwin Award of its own. Back in 2015, Collie's neighbor was bored. So bored that the only thing they could think of to alleviate their boredom was to grab their trash can, lay it down on the road, and hop inside it. They then used it to sled down the street like the world's worst toboggan.
Idle hands are the devil plaything. Oh boy.
However, unlike a toboggan track, a road has cars, which Collie's neighbor quickly discovered. Their trash can soon collided with an oncoming car and was yeeted into the side of someone's house.
Hearing a white person say yeeted into the side of a house just made my whole month.
They didn't survive, but they did prove that sometimes the trash takes itself out. Do you have any Darwin Award-winning stories of your own? Let me know down below, or if it's a bit lengthy, send me a message at stories@beamazed.com. Who knows, you might make it into the inevitable next part of this series. Bearing all. I live my life by a few very simple rules, and one of those is not to make any big decisions after I've had a few drinks. This is a lesson that a Serbian gentleman could have benefited from back in 2007. One evening during the Belgrade Beer Festival, this guy, who was assumed to be absolutely wasted, proceeded to head over to the Belgrade Zoo, broke in, stripped down until he was butt naked, and then climbed into the bear enclosure.
Look, man, when you drunk, a mouth is a mouth. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, I
Everything's
can
an
understand
orifice.
being drunk enough to text your ex or drunk enough to order $100 of fast food, but this is another level of drunk.
He was
and
living
one that
his
didn't
best
last
life.
long. The bears, Masha and Misha, wasted no time making a meal of the idiot, and it was only in the morning that the zookeepers discovered him, half-eaten and wholly dead. They figured that he must have been under the influence because, in their words, only an idiot would walk into the bear enclosure. Well, stuff can be two things. What's to say this guy wasn't drunk and an idiot?
Death by snoo. I'm not gonna lie, I'm going for it.
Good boy. Back in 2002, on the 29th of July, a TV channel in Ukraine reported on a story from the suburbs of Luhansk that nobody watching could believe. Late that evening, a deputy of the local administration board had been out walking his dog when he encountered a young police cadet. The cadet was escorting two women home in the dark and noticed the dog wasn't on a lead or wearing a muzzle. So doing his duty, the cadet informed the deputy that what he was doing was illegal. The deputy, having been upstaged so publicly, began to argue with the cadet. Things were getting tense, but the situation really escalated when the deputy suddenly revealed he had an RGD-5 grenade, pulled the pen, and hurled it at the cadet.
What?
Very rational response there. But because his dog wasn't on a lead or wearing a muzzle, the deputy's faithful four-legged friend ran to retrieve the grenade like a ball and brought it right back to him.
Bad
The master
dog!
and dog, sadly, both met an explosive fate.
Yo, dog ain't shit! Wow! What about the man's best friend, motherfucker? I put food in your bowl, bitch. How you gonna do me, nigga? Can't even trust a dog. What type of shit?
That's rough.
Wow!
Shot. There aren't enough considerate car thieves in this world, if you ask me.
That's rough.
Unlike our next Darwin Award winner. Rather than just stealing cars and abandoning them when they were reported stolen, one car thief in Pittsburgh would also set fire to them, reasoning that this helped the owners claim insurance. But this horrendous habit would eventually become his own downfall. Back in 1998, our arsonist and a few friends decided to steal an old van that wasn't in the best of shape. Soon after, it was reported stolen to the police, so as usual, he planned to set the vehicle ablaze by lighting a fire in the passenger seat. However, he didn't know that the door handle on the driver's side of the cab was broken, so when he tried to get out, he quickly discovered he was trapped. His friends tried to get him out, but the door was locked and the fire quickly burned out of control. Police found him the next day. Apparently, he was charred to a crisp. Idiot confinement. We all know at least one person who just cannot live without attention. Aside from being impossible to satisfy, they often don't know when to stop, much like this next award winner. Back in 2015, a Croatian criminal who
I just got done dealing with some people who didn't know when to stop, and that's not even nasty.
who'd been jailed for repeatedly threatening his ex-girlfriend was put in the prison's solitary confinement section for bad behavior. Not a fan of his new padded pad, he decided to force the guards to pay attention to him by pulling out a lighter he'd smuggled in and setting fire to the cushion pads lining the walls, ceiling, and floors. He expected the guards to come back to get him out immediately, but 20 seconds later, no one was coming. 40 seconds later, he was still on his own, and the fire was growing. After a minute, he began to panic as the room was starting to fill with smoke and flames. All too late, he realized he'd set fire to a room that was completely flammable, and the guards simply wouldn't notice in time. Well, that's one way to serve a life sentence. Man versus tree. Back in 2004, police were called to the scene of an accident around the back of a house in Georgia, USA, that left them, in a word, stumped. A large tree had toppled on top of a truck, both of which were charred and smoldering. Inside the truck was a body burned beyond recognition, but the entire scene didn't make any sense. The tree had fallen onto the truck instead of away from it, which is what they would have expected if the two had collided. But why would they have collided behind a house? And what had started the fire? Slowly but surely, the puzzle pieces came together. It appeared that the gentleman behind the wheel of the truck had been attempting to remove the tree from the yard by tying the truck to the tree and flooring it. He'd assumed the tree would use some sort of cartoon physics and fall away from the truck, but because we live in reality, the tree fell in the direction of the applied force and landed on top of the truck, crushing the driver. The engine overheated, setting both the truck and tree ablaze, and the rest is Darwin Award-winning history.
Hey, but look on the bright side. At least they didn't have to pay somebody $200 to do it for them.
Getting shredded. Hiring a tree surgeon to trim back or cut down your trees can be expensive, but doing the work yourself can end up costing even more, as one man found out back in 2008. Instead of paying a professional, he'd hired an industrial tree shredder and placed it at the base of an old oak tree in his yard which had recently been struck by lightning. He was planning on cutting away the dead section of the tree himself by climbing up and trimming it away, dropping any stray branches down into the hopper beneath him. Only thing was, he hadn't used harnesses, safety equipment, or, well, anything to secure himself to the tree. So entirely unsecured, he clambered up the ladder, stepped out onto a branch, and began cutting away when suddenly he lost his footing and fell straight into the shredder. Yikes. Well, on the plus side, I bet he made for a very moist mulch. Claymore Cretans. Cambodia has seen its share of violence and explosions following the historic and horrendous Cambodian-Vietnamese War. But in 1999, 10 years after the war ended, an explosion in a cafe in Svay Rieng province caught the attention of the tabloids. According to witnesses, 3 regular frenemies were drinking heavily at a cafe and exchanging insults with one another when one of them, clearly disgruntled, suddenly pulled out a Claymore landmine and threw it under the table. He drunkenly explained he'd found it in his backyard and wanted the men to play the ultimate game of Russian roulette with it. While the other, much smarter patrons were fleeing, these 3 intoxicated idiots took turns stamping on the pressure-triggered explosive in an attempt to set it off. Several minutes and stamps later, the bomb detonated, taking all 3 men with it. Well, they say you can take out 2 birds with 1 stone, or in this case, 3 idiots with 1 landmine. Leveled crossing. April 15th is a pretty important day in the U.S. calendar. Why? Because that's the most common day of the U.S. tax filing deadline. But back in 2001, this fell on a Sunday, meaning there were limited post office hours available to send off any last-minute tax documents before the IRS came knocking. This was something a man from Tennessee desperately wanted to avoid, and so he was in his car racing to the post office in the hopes of submitting his taxes on time. But as he was driving, he noticed a slow-moving train heading for a crossing which would have blocked his route for several minutes at least. In an attempt to avoid this, he floored it and sped over the crossing just before the train reached it. But as he did so, crash! Another car racing from the other direction was also trying to beat the train, and the 2 collided. One driver perished and the other was wounded, but by some cosmic miracle, the crash occurred just to the side of the tracks, so the train passed by unimpeded, and no passengers were injured. Well, I guess these idiots proved that trying to beat an active train crossing is taxing, to say the least. Getting airtime. If you've ever been to Holiday World and Splash and Safari in Indiana, USA, then you probably know the Raven. This big old bird-themed wooden roller coaster has a peak height of 110 feet and a top speed of 50 miles per hour. Not exactly the tallest or fastest coaster out there, but still super fun nonetheless. However, back in 2003, one woman made a supremely dumb decision in a bid to really get her adrenaline pumping. Riding the Raven with her fiancé, the pair of roller coaster enthusiasts had their lap bar and seatbelts checked by staff before the coaster set off. But a few moments later, she undid her seatbelt, tucked the 2 sides into the cushions of her seat, and wriggled out of the lap bar. She wanted to stand up as the coaster went down the drops in a bid to catch what roller coaster enthusiasts refer to as airtime. But during the 5th drop, which was some 69 feet high, she lost her footing and was sent tumbling over the edge to her demise. Gee, it's almost like the safety restraints were there for a reason. Dog days. In my opinion, people who hurt animals on purpose belong in a special circle of hell.
That's real.
And as it would happen, this next story, while involving a dog who was likely abused by its owner, ends humiliatingly for said owner.
I'm glad.
That means I get to immortalize him here for the entire world to laugh at.
That's real. Because I'm going to laugh. Hit humans, man, not animals. Just get in the UFC, man. You'll be able to do all the violence you want.
2008 and head over to upstate New York. Here, a 50-year-old man was bird hunting alongside a few of his buddies with his faithful canine companion at his side. Suddenly, the dog found a deer leg bone and began chewing on it. The owner tried to take it away, but the dog refused to give up its bone. Frustrated, the hunter began to wield his shotgun like a club, swinging the butt of it at the dog. Each time he did, the dog dodged. That was until this idiot slammed the butt of the shotgun into the ground. The shock triggered the gun to fire, with the muzzle pointed directly at his stomach. The huntsman was airlifted to the hospital, but didn't make it, though he did live just long enough to confirm this account to the police. Well, what can I say? At least the dog got to keep its bone. Midnight Mess. North Carolina is an American state that allows a lot of different types of gun ownership. And while most people are careful with the way they use, handle, and store their guns, that can't be said for everyone. Back in December 1992, during the very early hours, a man in the town of Newton was woken by the sound of the landline telephone ringing next to his bed. Sleepily, in the darkness, he grabbed the phone and put it to his ear. Only it wasn't the phone he grabbed, but the handgun he'd left on his bedside table. For some reason, this incredibly sloppy gun owner had left his handgun there with the safety off, and when he brought it up to his ear, accidentally pushing the trigger down in the process, boom. So for any gun owners watching, don't leave your firearms lying around with the safety off, unless you too want your gun to double up as the world's worst alarm clock. Honorable mention, French hiss. Now, it wouldn't be a Darwin Award video without at least one insane story heralding from the state of Florida. We've covered plenty of crazy stories from this state before, but this next one might just be the weirdest yet. Back in 2017, a man from Putnam County discovered a rattlesnake on his property. So he did the responsible thing and put it in a tank with the intent to release it somewhere far away the following day. Surprisingly responsible for a Florida man story, right? Well, in the meantime, he told his neighbors what he'd found, who had a less responsible reaction. They immediately decided to play with the wild snake, before one of them said he was going to kiss it on the mouth. I'm not sure what he thought was going to happen, but as he puckered up for a big open-mouthed snaky smooch, the rattlesnake did what you'd expect it to. It bit him on the tongue. Now, rattlesnake venom is nasty, and in the right doses it can cause numbness, swelling, nausea, difficulty breathing, and even death. And so, as this guy's tongue and throat started to swell up, he was rushed to the hospital and put in a protective coma state for a few days. Miraculously, he survived, so sadly no Darwin Award today. But with any luck, this taught our resident idiot a thing or two about not forcing himself on deadly animals. Consent is key, my dude.
Unconsensual sex with animals is a lot riskier than you would think. A lot harder, too. It's way easier to just act like you like the same stuff that a girl likes and then invite her back to your house for wine and feet nudes. 60% of the time, it works every time.
Life. Helium can be hilarious. Because the gas is 6 times less dense than air, sound waves travel through it much quicker. So if you inhale it, your voice sounds much higher. I could listen to this forever.
That's funny. I could have went the rest of my life without ever having heard it the first time.
But helium shouldn't be inhaled for too long, because even though it's a gas, you still need oxygen to breathe. Which is a very basic science lesson that these two next award winners apparently missed out on.
Show me somebody taking in the air from a balloon and it sounded like T-Pain. I'd want to see that. I don't do opera music.
Back in 2006 in Tampa Bay, Florida, two 21-year-olds spotted a huge promotional balloon 8 foot in diameter used to advertise condominiums for Lakeview at Calusa Trace. It was late and quiet, and so they decided to pull the huge balloon down and get inside it for maximum high-voiced humor. They cut it open and shoved their top halves inside as the balloon gradually deflated, enjoying the squeaky high notes. But it didn't last long. You see, when our lungs are filled with helium, it means we're not filling them with oxygen, which our organs rely on. Depending on how much helium is inhaled, a person can lose consciousness quickly and die from lack of oxygen, also known as asphyxiation, which is exactly what happened. Dizzy and confused, these two idiots lost consciousness and were only found the next morning when a local sheriff spotted the bottom halves of their bodies sticking out from the deflated balloon. Well, at least they ended on a high. A burning problem. Now, I really respect volunteer firefighters. It's a pretty thankless job that requires an immense amount of bravery. But being brave and being stupid aren't mutually exclusive terms, as the Sequoia Volunteer Fire Department in Tennessee proved back in 1999. This supreme team of 7 idiots were bored, having not received a call for help in over 2 months. And so they started up a dangerous habit of using gasoline to light fires in vacant houses in a rural part of Chattanooga. They'd then rush in, put out the blaze, and pretend to be heroes. But this incredibly dangerous ruse all fell apart one day when one of them, who was spreading gasoline in the attic, didn't realize the others had already started the blaze. The fire spread so quickly it trapped the wannabe hero in the attic, where he met his demise. When the real firefighters and police were called in, they realized all too quickly what had been happening. The 6 accomplices faced a combined total of 60 years in prison. Man, I don't think there's enough water on Earth to cool that burn. Love in the cockpit. Let's fly back in time to 1991 Florida, where 2 pilots of a small Piper Seneca aircraft decided to undertake a simulated instrument flight. This is where a literal hood is placed over the eyes of the pilot, and they fly using only the instrument on the dashboard. It's a fairly standard practice. However, on this day, witnesses noticed that while in the air, the aircraft's right wing suddenly failed before it dived down and crashed.
Oh!
Neither pilot survived. People began to wonder what could have caused such a tragic accident. Had both pilots been wearing a hood? Was the plane defective? Was it on purpose? Well, on closer inspection of the crash, a few things became clear. The front right seat was in a fully reclined position, neither pilot was wearing their seatbelt, and both were only...
Yep, one of them was getting street mouth. The other one was on the receiving end. And then right as they reached that special moment, he realized that I am incapacitated for either 7 seconds or the entire time that this is going down. And at some point, he was just like, look, if I move, I don't think I'm going to bust this nut the same way. I'm just going, Jesus take the wheel. And now it's over.
Partially clothed. Further examination revealed no rips or tears to any zippers or buttons, so it appeared that the pilots had removed their clothes themselves, used the fully reclined seat as a bed, and, tried to join the Mile High Club, if you get my drift. But with no one, flying the plane, it began to move erratically, leading to the wing failure and eventual crash. Guess you could say they were victims of the ultimate high. Gunning for a fight. Okay, I want you to imagine you were planning a robbery. I imagine there'd be a few essential things you'd try and take into account before picking a target, right? Things like, what valuables will they have? Will there be many people around, or will they be well armed? Alternatively, you can contemplate none of these things and just wing it, like our next Darwin Award winner did. Back in 1990, our would-be criminal made the big-brain decision to target a gun store located near Seattle, Washington. Did he do this early in the morning or late at night when it'd be a little quieter? No, he went for 4:40 in the afternoon when the store was super crowded. He waltzed in, fired a few wild shots into the air, and announced to everyone in no uncertain terms that he was robbing the joint. Now, being a gun store, this place attracted a certain type of patron. The type that really likes guns. And it was only after he'd fired off his shots that he noticed a uniformed policeman having coffee with the store owner. Yep, our criminal had also managed to miss the police car parked outside the store. All of a sudden, several people being held up pulled out their own firearms and let loose on the robber, including the policeman. After taking a barrage of bullets, he was put down, and amazingly, no one else in the store was injured. Considering just how dumb this guy was, I'm amazed he was holding the gun the right way around.
Dumpster drank.
Ooh.
Of all the places you should never gather a nice, refreshing drink from, a landfill site is pretty high on the list. Or at least it should be. But for one couple from Belarus, a landfill seemed just as good as a convenience store for acquiring drinks back in October 2020.
A couple? As in more than one person? How dumb you gotta be for your boyfriend to convince you to sample trash? With your mouth, nonetheless. Not that there's any other place you would sample it from, but still.
While scouring the local dump, as you do, a man found this bottle, filled with a mysterious murky liquid, and took the bottle home to share its contents with his wife. It seemed the pair assumed it contained some perfectly safe-to-drink homemade hooch, and like a nice bottle of wine after a hard day's work, popped it open to share.
Hooch rhymes with gooch, and I would never drink from a gooch, unless she were attractive. We gonna edit that out.
Unsurprisingly, the next day, the couple became extremely ill, and while emergency services were called, it proved too late. The concoction in the bottle, it turned out, had indeed been homemade alcohol, but its owner had seemingly disposed of it after realizing it wasn't very good at all. In fact, it was completely poisonous. As a result, the couple kicked the bucket together after what might be considered the worst romantic dinner of all time. Pretty dumb, right?
There's a lesson in all this, folks. Don't eat ass. It could kill you.
On the fence. Some people will go to great lengths to protect their personal possessions.
That's a good movie. Go see it. Wolf of Wall Street.
But one Brazilian man's desperation to keep his car safe from thieves back in 2010 proved to be his downfall. As robberies were becoming increasingly frequent in his local area, the fellow decided to keep his car protected by building a miniature electric fence around it. Only this wasn't any old touch it and get a slightly uncomfortable warning shock kind of fence. This one was amped up and designed to hurt a lot. For a while, it seemed to work well, seeing as nobody stole the car. But things soon came to a shocking conclusion. When, on one occasion, he forgot he'd left the electric fence turned on when he attempted to move it aside to get into his car. He was electrocuted, and he'd built his contraption with such a high current that it killed him. Talk about being your own worst enemy. A refreshing swim. How far would you go to save your phone? Would you be crazy enough to dive into an icy, partially frozen river to retrieve it? Well, one man from Detroit did exactly that in February 2020.
Black people are a tropical people. We do not fox with the cold. Why y'all think ice hockey is the only sport that black people ain't really dominating? But the minute they make an ice hockey rink with a heated floor, I will be in there. Because I like ice skating. I just like to feel my gooch more. Because when it's frozen, it's just numbness. I can't.
While fishing through a large hole he'd cut out of the ice, the fellow accidentally dropped his phone into the water. Clearly lacking in any notion of self-preservation, he dove straight into the hole after it. Unfortunately, he failed to realize that sudden submersion in ice-cold water can be pretty bad for the human body. It can send you into shock, can instantly paralyze your muscles if you haven't received training beforehand, and can even cause a heart attack due to intense constriction of your blood vessels. Whether one of these physiological problems took hold or whether he simply became disoriented under the ice remains unclear. All we know for sure is that he didn't re-emerge until several hours later. When emergency responders pulled his lifeless body from the water.
Well, look at the bright side. At least technically you didn't lose your contact list. We're gonna edit that out.
We can only assume he must have had a glorious collection of cute animal pics on his phone to make jumping into icy doom seem worth it.
Deepfake porn. Lots of deepfake
Lesson
porn.
not learned. As the COVID-19 pandemic came into full swing in 2020, it brought a lot of Darwin Award contenders out of the woodwork. One example occurred at a Serbian Orthodox church in November 2020, following the death of a high-ranking bishop. The bishop's death had been caused by coronavirus, yet the funeral held at the church showed no regard at all for the types of conditions that led to such an infection. The funeral was essentially a checklist of everything you shouldn't do if you want to avoid the disease. There was large crowds in an enclosed space, countless people being fed Holy Communion from the same unwashed spoon, and, of course, countless people kissing the hand of the recently deceased, who, I must reiterate, died of coronavirus. On top of that, there were only a handful of people wearing masks. In a twist you probably saw coming, almost immediately after the funeral, the church patriarch who'd organized and led the event also became seriously ill with COVID-19. He too died, having willingly failed to respect the advice of scientists on one of the most serious health disasters of the past 100 years. I just hope his funeral was a little more restrained.
Maybe. Only maybe.
Clotheslined. There are many dangers facing motorcyclists on the road, but one of the greatest of all is a rider's own recklessness. This was proven one morning in 2008, when one motorcyclist took the ride of a lifetime near Minnesota Key in Florida. Witnesses reported seeing the risky rider, wearing nothing but swim trunks and sneakers, speeding towards the Minnesota Key drawbridge.
The ride of a lifetime don't even sound good, unless it's involving like an in-shape, attractive female or something. I don't even. Maybe you should come to my house. It's the ride of a lifetime because I've got syphilis.
Which was in the process of being raised up.
What?
He ignored the flashing red lights warning drivers to stay away from the bridge and instead attempted to accelerate.
He was trying to Fast and Furious to it. They go over the bridge, but they make it because they use the NOS at the last second. He tried to do that.
hoping to jump the ever-growing gap.
Oh boy.
Newsflash, he didn't make it. He'd failed to spot the safety gate arms, which had already descended. He crashed head first straight into one of the gates and was instantly swept from his bike and onto the asphalt, while the bike itself continued up the ramp across the gap to the other side. While the rider failed to survive the ordeal, at least one of them made it across.
Yeah! Turn up! Hey, the bike made it! Hey!
Proving a point. On May 19, 1885, a man named Robert Emmett Odlum set out to be the first man to jump into New York City's East River from the Brooklyn Bridge. His reasons for this strange aspiration were surprisingly well-meaning for the most part. First and foremost, he sought to prove that, against the commonly held beliefs of the time, people did not die by simply falling through the air. He hoped this demonstration would encourage people to be willing to jump from burning buildings into a safety net in the incident of a fire, as people were too distrusting of this idea at the time. He also hoped to achieve some fame in proving it was safe. But unfortunately, any hopes he'd had of reassuring people about the safety of leaping from great heights were soon dashed when it came time to jump. As Odlum leapt from the bridge's roadway 130 feet up, he attempted to stay straight in the air, but a strong wind blew him into a diagonal angle of descent. This meant when he eventually struck the water, the angle of impact caused some serious damage. Slapping the water at approximately 62 miles per hour, it exerted enough force to rupture his spleen, liver, and kidneys, and break several of his ribs. The official cause of death, however, was declared to be concussion. On the bright side, people now know that rapidly falling doesn't kill you as much as the landing. In the words of British TV legend Jeremy Clarkson, speed has never killed anyone. Suddenly becoming stationary, that's what gets you.
Look at the bright side. At least no one played I Believe I Can Fly during the times when those guys was falling.
Hazard prevention. Sometimes you really have to wonder about people's sense of logic. Case in point, two guys who suddenly landed on the sense of hazard awareness after doing something incredibly dangerous and stupid back in 2002. In a farm field in Pennsylvania, two friends were practicing their marksmanship by shooting, not at bottles or cans, but the electrical insulators holding power lines aloft overhead. After shooting 6 of the insulators off of 2 utility poles, a live, high-voltage wire fell to the ground, risking setting the entire surrounding field ablaze.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly seized by an uncharacteristic sense of health and safety, one of the men rushed over to the wire and attempted to pick it up to move it to prevent danger. The instant he seized it in his hand, the powerful current passed through him and he was fatally electrocuted. The lesson? If you're going to suddenly grow a conscience, maybe try doing it before you do something lethally stupid. Safety first. The saying, "practice what you preach," has never been more ironically fitting than in the case of one man who met his untimely demise in Australia in 2017. While filming a forklift safety video, the owner of a safety training school was thrown from the forklift he was driving and fatally crushed by his payload. An investigation revealed that despite what the intentions of the video had been, the man had broken several crucial rules to forklift safety. He was driving over rough, uneven terrain at high speed, all while not wearing a seatbelt. Alongside an unhealthy sprinkling of driver error, it proved that sometimes you really should listen to your own advice. Don't go chasing waterfalls.
And that's not a TLC reference. I'm sick of people telling me that is. I don't even watch that network, bro. Get it together. Hot damn almighty, you get it together.
Most rational people can easily conclude safety advice displayed at dangerous locations tend to be there for a reason. Not so bright people, however, often seem to have problems grasping this idea. This was proven by one woman on a pleasure trip to a natural waterfall at a tourist hotspot in Cauca, Colombia in January 2020. While searching for the perfect selfie angle, the woman ignored safety warnings about wandering too close to the edge of the waterfall. Paying more attention to her phone than where she was headed, she ended up plummeting over the waterfall's edge, straight down into the boulder and rock-filled pool below. The hard landing caused enough damage to her skull to set her expiry date to right there, right then. Ugh, how many misguided lives will be lost before people finally learn selfies are never worth dying over?
Tell that to the people who used to plank for a living. Like 17 of those people died plank on the end of a cliff. What were you thinking?
Vending fatality. At some point, you may have heard you shouldn't shake a vending machine because it might fall on you, but nobody ever believes that's ever actually happened, right? Well, as it turns out, it actually did happen back in 1984 in Safety Harbor, Florida. As a newspaper article from the time recounts, a man had been attempting to get a can of soda from the vending machine in his apartment complex's recreation center. Whether he paid his cash and the machine failed to dispense his goods, or whether he just decided to shake it to try and get a free drink, remains unclear to this day.
That's a free drink shake, bro. I've lifted a couple of vending machines for free drinks. You'd be surprised how hard you gotta shake one of these things to not steal the soft drinks out of it. Pretty rough.
All that's known for sure is that an hour later, the thirsty fella was found utterly crushed with a vending machine on top of him. Yeesh. Going by this tale, if you want to stay safe, Safety Harbor is not the place to go.
Or just drink juice. Duh.
Especially if you're thirsty. Troublesome transport. In 2020, a poorly chosen seating arrangement on a bus resulted in the unexpected demise of several people in Manitou, India. While being transported to a wedding venue on a very overcrowded bus, several of the guests climbed up onto the rooftop for the ride.
No.
This was, of course, already a very risky idea, from the risk of falling off alone. But it wasn't a fall that proved to be these rooftop riders' ruin. Their downfall came, instead, in the form of some high-tension, relatively low-hanging electrical wires. At their lofty perch, the riders were at head level with the wires, and before they had the chance to react, 3 of them struck the exposed wire directly and were electrocuted. One was killed instantly. Another succumbed to his injuries later, while the third survived, albeit thoroughly fried. Next time, I've got a feeling he'll just wait for the next bus to come instead. Watching the skies. If an opportunity presented itself for you to communicate with extraterrestrials, would you take it? And
No.
if so, how far would you go to make sure you didn't let the chance pass you by?
No.
Well, one woman put the chance to commune with little green men above her own safety back in 1982. Believing she'd been contacted by some type of intergalactic power, she convinced a willing companion to accompany her in carrying out the instructions of her alien contact.
AKA a thirsty man. She found a dude who was hard up for vagina and told him, you know what, we're gonna go catch some aliens, and if you do, I'll think about it.
She claimed they'd commanded her to drive out to an isolated location in the northeastern Minnesota wilderness and await further instruction. Assuming this would be a hugely significant moment in the interstellar advancement of humankind, the pair did exactly that, despite the extremely snowy winter weather. Once parked up in the designated location, they dutifully awaited the arrival of their extraterrestrial acquaintances. And they waited, and waited, and waited. Unfortunately, their food supplies ran out after a week, and they lost access to water when the nearby lake froze over. Still, they refused to leave their post on the off chance that the aliens appeared while they were gone. Putting total faith in the idea that the aliens would appear before anything bad happened to either of them, they stayed in the freezing cold with nothing to eat or drink. Eventually, frozen, starving, and fatally dehydrated, the woman died. Shortly after, the man accompanying her, in his much weakened state and with the car having been rendered unusable by the icy conditions, crawled through a quarter-mile of snow to save himself. He survived, but his alien contacting partner did not, and their little green guests never showed up. I guess the aliens must have got the wrong address. Best seats in the house. For as long as there have been sports events requiring tickets, there have also been people trying to find ways to watch for free. This unfortunate tendency to save a bit of cash proved to be the quite literal downfall of a number of football fans in San Francisco back in 1900. To avoid the ticket fees, between 400 and 500 supporters clambered onto the roof of a glass factory so they could view a game taking place at San Francisco's nearby Old Recreation Park Stadium.
Of a glass factory? Nobody knew this was a bad idea?
But in a twist of fate that somehow occurred to none of them as a possibility, the factory roof proved incapable of supporting all that weight. 20 minutes after kickoff, not only did the roof collapse, but it also sent the revelers falling directly onto the blazing hot brick cover of a furnace vat filled with molten glass.
Oh my God!
To paint a picture of how hot this furnace was, several of the men who fell onto the cover instantly caught ablaze. 22 of the participants in this ill-thought-out plan were sent shuffling off this mortal coil from the incident, while 100 more suffered serious injuries. While people today may still not have learned their lesson to always pay for tickets, they seem to have learned not to pile en masse onto factory roofs in the years since.
Not ones that are made of glass, you fool!
Deadliest catch. Being a magician can be a dangerous job at times, particularly if you specialize in risky-looking illusions. While many classic nail-biting tricks are often much safer than they seem, some of them are genuinely hazardous if not followed correctly, like catching a bullet tricks. Now, obviously, tricks of this category, under normal circumstances, are never actually supposed to involve real bullets being fired by a magician's assistant. But in 1889, an early performer of this trick had a serious mishap on stage. Magician and cabinet maker Michael Hattal took to the stage, promising his audience he could catch a speeding bullet using nothing more than the American flag wrapped around his body. He called an assistant up to the stage and asked him to pick 2 pieces of ammunition from an ammo box for Hattal to load into a rifle. At this point, Hattal would usually switch out the rounds for blanks, but on this occasion, he accidentally swapped the real ammo for more ammo. The volunteer took aim and fired, delivering a fatal blow to the unfortunate performer. Luckily, Hattal survived just long enough to take responsibility for the blunder, clearing the volunteer's name on his deathbed. On the bright side, he certainly gave the audience a performance they'd remember.
No. A magic trick you could only perform one time.
Man versus cactus. Stay.
Is it sexual?
The topic of firearm mishaps now, we have the story of one man who lost a shootout against a stationary target. In 1982, a couple of petty criminals headed out into Arizona's Sonoran Desert for a decidedly dumb purpose, shooting at cacti. Their targets of choice were the local saguaro cacti, which can grow well over 40 feet tall, a fact which should have probably raised some alarm bells. But it didn't, and the tremendous size and weight of each cactus only made them more appealing targets. The first cactus was shot down without incident, thanks to the powerful blast of a 16-gauge shotgun. But the second target was larger, at almost 30 feet tall. One of the cactus vandals moved into point-blank range to deliver the kill shot, pulled the trigger, and brought huge chunks of the 2-ton spiky behemoth raining down upon himself. He was killed almost instantly by the weight of the spiky chunks that landed on him, while his buddy lived to share the tale. I suppose the moral of the story is, don't bring a gun to a cactus fight. Something to lean on. In August 2020, an attempt to pose for a picture in an unusual spot ended very badly, showing just why you should be careful what you lean on. The photo opportunity in question occurred for one man at a large statue of a cross in Sao Paulo, Brazil. The man climbed up the central concrete column of the cross and onto one of the arms, where he posed for a picture giving a thumbs up. However, he overestimated the strength of the upper beam, which he leant against while the picture was being taken. As he leant on it, the beam came loose and toppled right over, sending it and the man falling straight down to the ground. A particularly nasty landing waited for him at the bottom, and to make matters worse, the heavy beam landed right on top of him, with the man's religious photo opportunity ultimately proving fatal. If there is a God, it looks like he doesn't appreciate selfies. Alligator affection. Sometimes, the universe seems to have a funny tendency of punishing people who put too much faith in their own good luck, particularly those who willingly put themselves in unbelievably dangerous situations, like one woman who put too much faith in her ability to not get eaten by hungry wild animals in Kiowa Island, South Carolina in May 2020. While in a drunken state, the woman decided to get waist-deep in a local pond, which she knew was home to an alligator. This was despite the friend who watched from horror at the shore warning her the gator had been observed chowing down on a live deer a few days earlier. Instead of taking that as a sign of the gator's killing power, the woman instead retorted, "I don't look like a deer," and waded over to pet the reptile. The gator, of course, wasn't too keen on this idea and grabbed her with its powerful jaws.
Delicious.
Miraculously, the woman managed to break free and began wading back.
No, don't tell me she lived. Because the last thing you want is someone that done reproducing. You want kids that are running into zoo encagements. I'm gonna pet the tigers, nigga. You know what I'm saying? Like, no, you gotta get her out of here now. Like,
back to the shore, telling her friend, "I guess I won't do that again." And she was technically right, because she wouldn't have the chance. Why? Because the gator grabbed her again while she was retreating and dragged her below the water to her demise. Unfortunately, one very important realization came all too late to this woman. You don't mess with alligators.
Congratulations, we got him. Rickety Rouse are coming, we got this, yeah!
A dangerous mix. In the world of lethal combinations, there are few dangerous pairings more obvious than water and electricity. But some people totally failed to grasp that fact. Like one man in New York, who grew impatient after a storm damaged some power lines along his street, leaving him without electricity. Somehow, he'd landed on the idea that he'd be able to fix the problem easily if he could just remove the downed wires and replace them himself. Assuming he knew better than the emergency workers guarding the downed wires to keep the public safe, the man repeatedly attempted to gain access to them. But after being shooed away several times, he decided to wait until the cover of darkness, at which point he returned to the site. With plastic bags on his feet for what he must have assumed was total protection from any electric threats, he began his idea of a fix. Attempting to fast-track the repairs, he tried to cut off part of the downed wire with an industrial power saw, while absent-mindedly standing on the wet, puddle-covered floor left by the storm. As his saw reached the metal core of the wire, which he'd failed to realize was still live, his body and the wet puddle his feet were in provided the perfect circuit to the ground. He was electrocuted with a full force of 4,800 volts. Needless to say, while his determination to help was commendable, a human body just wasn't made to endure that kind of a shock. In a moment of lethal stupidity, the DIY moment proved fatal, well and truly earning this man a Darwin Award.
Juicy Jenga.
I thought he was about to say Juicy J. I was like, no, Juicy J died? Oh, God, I love his green Supreme skull jacket.
Back in April 2022, a thirsty thief in the city of Catalica, Italy, ended up in a situation that was more than he could swallow. On the Easter Monday, he decided to break into a clearly closed grocery store and grab himself a drink. But instead of pulling a bottle from one of the shelves, he chose to grab a bottle from a huge tower of crates that had been stacked up by the staff. And not just any bottle, one from a crate right in the middle. Anyone who's ever played Jenga knows this is a rookie error. And as you probably guessed, the entire stack collapsed, crushing him beneath all that water weight. He wasn't found until the next day when store staff had to go back through the CCTV footage to figure out what caused all this chaos. Well, one thing's for sure. He did a great job of winning this Darwin Award.
Did a great job.
Clown School.
How you die in clown
Can
school?
you juggle?
No.
No matter how many times I've tried, I always end up with more balls on the floor than there are in the air.
We call that street meat where I'm from. Very street, very meat.
Now, I've seen juggling masters that can yeet swords, fire sticks, even chainsaws up into the air with confidence. Worst comes to worst, they can only really risk hurting themselves. Me? I'll use little beanbags, balls, maybe even eggs if I'm feeling extra spicy. But you know what smart people and even experts won't touch? Grenades. I mean, juggling grenades, that's the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard. No one would be dumb enough to do that, right? Right?
What?
Let's rewind to 2001 and head over to Vidovic, Croatia, where a bunch of college students were having a big old party. One of them decided to try and impress his friends by juggling a few items, one of which was, you guessed it, a hand grenade. I'm honestly struggling to follow the logic here, but having pulled the pin, he proceeded to juggle with the live explosive. Now, grenades work via a chemical reaction, giving the thrower a few precious seconds to get out of range before it explodes. This guy, for whatever reason, didn't think this applied to him, and the grenade exploded as he was juggling it.
Oh!
The blast injured 6 equally dumb onlookers, but our Darwin Award winner was removed from the gene pool completely. Well, he might have been acting like a clown, but this guy ended up proving he was the entire circus. Car wash cretin. Chances are you've been through an automated car wash before, right? Okay, what's the first rule of using an automated car wash?
Don't hang your junk out of the passenger seat window in hopes at a chance of some sexual pleasure that the spinning brushes might make happen. A friend of mine tells me it is an awful idea, and he didn't even get close to getting the finish. I don't know what race he was in, but I would be pissed if I didn't win it either.
No, it isn't record a TikTok. It's don't get out of the car. No, seriously, machinery in some of these places is incredibly powerful and can cause serious injuries or worse. Back in April 2022 in San Diego, a man drove into an automated car wash and then, without starting up the cycle, tried to get out of his vehicle while his car was still in gear. Apparently dragged by the vehicle, he ended up fatally pinned in between the left side of his car and the car wash machinery. But here's the thing, no one can explain why he decided to get out of the car. Was there a bee in there with him? Did he think the automated part of the wash meant he didn't need to be in his vehicle? Whatever it was, his car came out the other side of the washer, much messier than before. Pretty fly for a dead guy. Back in November 2021, a student pilot from Houston, Texas was allowed by his instructor to fly solo in a Cessna 172 light aircraft for the first time ever. Absolutely exhilarated by the experience, he went out and bought himself a brand new plane, a Piper PA-28140, despite not having a full license yet. His instructor clearly told him that he still needed more tutorage before he'd be able to fly solo regularly, and even more so before he could fly his new plane. However, our student wasn't one for rules. It turns out there are quite a few things student pilots can't do. These include fly with a passenger in the aircraft, fly at night, without endorsement from the instructor, fly when it's foggy with limited visibility, and fly a different model of aircraft than what's on their license and less specifically endorsed by their instructor. Can you guess how many of these rules the student broke?
All of
If
them.
you guessed all of them, go get yourself a cookie.
I
One very
deserve it.
foggy evening, he decided to take a friend of his up in his brand new aircraft without telling his instructor. Roughly 4 minutes after taking off, unable to see properly, the plane clipped some nearby treetops, crashing moments later. Neither the student nor passenger survived. Guess he wasn't as fly as he thought he was.
Damn.
All aboard the pain train. I love a good mystery, don't you? Well, back on the 15th of December 2009, that's exactly what the staff of Germany's U2 subway were faced with. A subway driver was trundling along in his train car when suddenly he spotted the body of a man laying over the tracks. After getting over the shock, confusion set in. How had he gotten here? With the regularity of the trains, there was no way he could have hopped off a platform, run down the tracks, and made it as far as he did. Had he jumped off the back of a moving subway car? And if he had, then why? It didn't make any sense. Because there was no surveillance footage at the location, the police were stumped. But then they discovered that one of the cars on the subway train that had passed over the tracks before the driver discovered the body had a single smashed window.
Oh no.
And suddenly it all made sense. This idiot had been alone in the subway car and decided, in all his brilliance, to swing from the handrail and smash one of the windows with his feet. After a couple of attempts, he succeeded, and then was promptly pulled out of the moving train thanks to the suction created by the train moving at speed through the tunnel. Nice. Real smart move there. Well, if ever you needed a really good reason not to damage public property, here it is. Killer
Damn.
pain. There are people out there who will do just about anything to get their hands on a couple of or potent pills, if you know what I mean. And I mean anything. Case in point, back in 2009, a Minnesota man figured that he could get his hands on some narcotic pain medication for free if he staged an accident and went to the hospital. Safe to say this guy wasn't the brightest bulb in the box. Nevertheless, he figured if he jumped out of a moving car, the injuries he sustained would ensure the doctors would have to give him the pain meds he craved. So our mastermind revved up his car, started driving, and then jumped out of the moving vehicle. There was just one hitch in his plan. It's hard to ask for pain meds when you're dead. Yep, the injuries he sustained from this stupid plot were so severe, he perished at the scene. Well, I haven't got any pain meds on me, but I do have the next best thing. Here you go, my guy. You can have this Darwin Award instead.
And a coffin.
Fireworks. Lunar New Year's in Kuala Lumpur is really something to behold. The fireworks set against the glittering lights of the city make for a magical night. The thing is, most types of fireworks are actually banned in Malaysia because of the flammable substances they contain. This means most fireworks displays are done illegally, and a lot of the locals don't know how they work, or how to use the industrial scale ones they can illicitly get their hands on. It was for exactly this reason that our next Darwin Award winner joined our ever-growing list. On 2005's Lunar New Year, a man was watching people set off industrial-scale fireworks that shot more than 150 feet into the air outside a club in suburban Kuala Lumpur. Curious, the man decided to get a better look at these powerful fireworks and bent face first over one of the launching tubes they were shooting out of. He was peering down the tube when one came screeching out into his face, sending him flying 30 feet backwards and giving him a few fatal head injuries. Now that's what you call a celebratory send-off. Need a lift? There's nothing wrong with going above and beyond for your job, but sometimes you have to watch just how far you go, as one janitor back in 1999 discovered. He was cleaning his building's elevator one day when he noticed something dripping from the ceiling. So eager to do a good job, he rode the second elevator up the shaft, climbed out a hidden service door, and stepped onto the roof of the first elevator. He began mopping up the puddle when all of a sudden, the elevator jolted. In his rush to get to the leak, he'd forgotten to immobilize the first elevator. Unable to do anything, the first elevator rose to the very top of the shaft, crushing him at the top. I don't envy the next janitor that had to clean up that mess. Saw that coming. Copper theft is a huge problem all over the world. Because of its ability to conduct electricity, it's become an incredibly sought-after building material, especially in the last few years. From January 2020 to May 2021, copper prices in the UK soared by an average of 74%, increasing from around £6,100 to about £10,750 per ton. This hasn't gone unnoticed by thieves, who have taken to stripping construction sites, buildings, even railways of the valuable material however they can. But not all these thieves work with Mission Impossible levels of precision during their raids, as one Scottish man proved back in 2001. The electric trains running across Glasgow collect power from an overhead cable. Any excess electricity is transmitted through a solid copper cable lining the rails, which is then routed to a distribution box. Our man, who appeared to have a good knowledge of these electrical systems, planned to saw this cable up in the time between the trains passing when no electricity was traveling through it. Pretty well thought out, and he might have gotten away with it as well were it not for one small, tiny, insignificant issue. The timetable he'd based his brilliant plan on was out of date. As he was sawing, the train began approaching 10 minutes before he'd expected it to. Thousands of volts of electricity suddenly jolted through his body, charring him to a crisp. Let's hope would-be thieves out there take this as a sign. A pretty shocking one at that. Cop shot. I'd like to think I'm pretty good at breaking down stories and explaining things so that everyone can understand them. This is something that back in 1993, a police officer in Illinois reportedly attempted to do, but it ended the worst way just about anything can. Another officer from their precinct had accidentally discharged their firearm into their stomach, unintentionally ending themselves the week before. In trying to explain how that was possible to his fellow officer, our cop in question decided to reenact the scenario. The Darwin Award winner pulled out his gun, aimed it at his stomach, and pulled the trigger. The only issue was that he forgot there was a bullet in the chamber, and he didn't have the safety on. Apparently he didn't survive. Hopefully no one in the precinct thought to reenact this reenactment.
Motherfucker.
Shoot your shot. Florida. Any American worth their salt knows that the citizens of this state are, without a doubt, some of the weirdest in the entire country. From organizing mass Facebook events to shoot down hurricanes, to painting political messages on crabs, their
Hillary is
bizarreness
a
knows
lying
no bounds.
fish.
Seriously, if it's a dumb idea, someone in Florida has probably tried it. Which is what brings us to our next entrant. Back in April 2022, 3 bored teenagers decided to cook up some fun by using some body armor and, in true American style, a handgun. It's not clear where they got the gun, but the teenagers took turns wearing the body armor and shooting each other, recording the whole thing and uploading it to Snapchat. I think we can all see where this is going. Yep, one of them donned the armor and laid himself out like a human target, but the other teen's aim was ever so slightly off, hitting him fatally in a part of his chest that wasn't covered by the vest. Panicked, the 2 remaining teenagers called an ambulance and reported the shooting. But then, in an even dumber move, they tried to delete the videos from their Snapchat and lied about what had happened. It didn't take long for an IT specialist to find the video, which made the entire situation look even worse than it already was. Hey kids, top tip here. If you're bored, go play a video game. Don't shoot your friends for Snapchat clout and then dig your own grave by lying about it. Considering these 2 are being tried as adults and could end up spending the rest of their lives behind bars, I'm going to give them 2 honorary Darwin Awards also. Nice one, boys. Doing Florida proud.
This nigga ain't shit. Nice one, boys. Doing Florida proud.
MacBook mistake. While I dragged those previous trigger-happy morons over the coals for their dumb gun safety behavior, their stupidity is nothing compared to another bullet-related Darwin Award. Back in March 2022, a Russian soldier in an active Ukrainian war zone came across an abandoned MacBook. Now, he wanted the MacBook, but he didn't have anywhere on his person to store it. No problem, he thought. I'll just remove the ballistic breastplate of my body armor and put the MacBook in there. Now, for those who don't know, MacBooks can't stop bullets. You know what can? A specially designed ballistic breastplate. But hey, it wasn't like he was going to get shot in, the active war zone he was in the middle of. Safe to say this stupid soldier didn't make it out of Ukraine alive. When Ukrainian soldiers eventually retrieved his body, they not only found the MacBook, but they also apparently found a stolen iPad as well. From the moronic logic this guy was employing, I wouldn't be surprised if he tried to use the tablet as a helmet. Fire ants. When police arrived at the scene in Rome, New York back in 2001, they struggled to understand what they were seeing. A woman's body was on fire in the grassy area adjacent to her home, and while there was a lighter and melted gas can discovered nearby, there was no immediate sign of foul play.
Oh my God, this freaking idiot got swarmed with ants and then tried to set herself on fire in order to get rid of the ants and ended up getting rid of her own damn self. Sounds about right.
Despite investigating the incident for months, the police turned up nothing and eventually came to the only logical explanation available. This woman had been smoking a cigarette and, according to her neighbors, indulging in her habit of dousing anthills in her yard with gasoline. While she was holding the gas can, an ember from the cigarette fell into the gasoline stream, which quickly ignited and traveled up the stream, bursting the can and immolating the woman in an instant. Guess that makes it ants 1, Karen 0.
Oh!
Superhuman stupidity. How strong do you think you are? Are you down at the gym every day pumping iron? Or does your body look like it's been made out of toothpicks? Whatever it is, I think we can all agree there are very few people on Earth that possess the raw strength needed to stop a car in its tracks. With an average car weighing in at a little over 4,000 pounds, you'd need superhuman strength to go toe-to-toe with any metal beast. But that thought didn't come across one man's mind back in 2001. Apparently, having parked his car at the edge of a reservoir in Fresno, California, he got out only to watch as his car slowly rolled forward towards the water's edge. Now, the logical thing here would be to jump into the car and put it in park, right? Well, this guy had another idea. He leapt in front of the car as it rolled forward, so assuming he'd be strong enough to act as some sort of immovable object.
Wow!
But he thought a bit too much of himself and the car just rolled over him, pinning him beneath the water, and he didn't survive. But his story does serve as a reminder that man cannot win a fight against a moving car, no matter how strong he thinks he is. jet-fueled idiocy. We've all taken a wrong turn at some point in our lives, but when there are multiple stop signs, warning signals, and traffic lights, quickly turning back is the logical answer. Though it wasn't for a taxi driver in Rio de Janeiro back in the year 2002. Having dropped off a fare at the Santos Dumont Airport, the taxi driver decided to follow the road around, assuming it'd lead away from the airport at some point. But soon he was confronted by sign after sign telling him he was actually approaching the runway. Flashing lights warned him a plane was on the runway and ready to take off, but apparently ignoring this, the taxi drove straight on. Despite the completely unobscured 737 passenger jet on the runway about to take off, he continued his journey behind it when both the plane's engines revved up. At their peak, each 737 jet engine can produce a huge 50,000 pounds of thrust. And as you probably figured out, a single taxi is no match for all that force. The engines blew the taxi away, flipping it more than 80 feet into the nearby sea. It was a brief journey that the driver didn't survive. I guess the moral of this story is, don't drive right behind a jet plane that's about to take off. Is that not already a given? Falling for you.
Oh, hell no.
Usually when you see reams of safety tape blocking off an area, it's a pretty clear sign that you should avoid that area, right? Doesn't matter what's happening inside, it's been blocked off for an important reason. Well, despite this being a pretty universal understanding, back in 2004, there was a man in South Africa who decided to ignore this entirely. Emphasis on the was. He was sitting in a cafe watching a team of lumberjacks across the way with loud chainsaws cutting down some large, heavy-looking trees. They'd cordoned off the area with tape, ensuring no one would be accidentally smushed by the falling timber. Despite this, our man suddenly made a beeline for the area, ducking under the tape to use the pavement to meet his girlfriend in a nearby shop. And at that exact moment, a huge tree the lumberjacks had quite clearly been working on came crashing down. Despite their frantic shouts, the guy ignored them and kept walking forward and was, and obviously, crushed by the tree. Crushed on the way to meet his crush. If it weren't so stupid, it'd almost be poetic.
Beautiful.
All natural causes. I'm terrible at taking racy pictures. I never know what pose to strike or what lingerie to wear. Jokes aside, there was one man in Germany who definitely didn't have these issues. Not only was this guy happy to take photos of himself completely nude, but he also took these photos out in public, and we know this for the same reason he ended up with a Darwin Award. Back in September 2000, our man was in his birthday suit in the medieval city of Rothenburg, taking photos of himself on top of a high stone wall. He set up his camera on a tripod, hopped up on the wall, and started pulling a few poses when suddenly he lost his balance and fell 16 feet onto the ground below. The police apparently had to develop the film of the camera to piece this case together, and I bet they were hoping he'd accidentally left the lens cap on. A buttload of sherry. Alcoholism is a terrible disease, with an estimated 107 million people all over the world suffering from some form of alcohol use disorder. But back in 2004, a man from Texas found a unique way to take his disorder to a whole other level.
Uh-oh.
He had a throat ailment, which meant that swallowing anything acidic was quite a painful process.
I think I might have read this one in a book somewhere. He had his wife funnel alcohol directly into his anus. Apparently that's the best way to do it if you're trying to get so drunk that you die of alcohol poisoning.
So he opted to take his liquor, rectally.
Oh boy.
This guy would give himself alcohol enemas. An enema is where you inject liquid into the rectum to stimulate the cleaning of the bowel. However, these liquids can also be taken into the body by way of the bloodstream, which is how our man opted to consume his spirits. One night, he was planning to have one hell of a party by buying 2 1.5-liter bottles of sherry and hooking them up for a, butt chug? Now, usually, when we've had enough to drink, we just stop drinking, or we pass out. Well, our guy had definitely had enough and passed out mid-alcohol enema. However, there was still a lot of sherry all up in his junk, which continued to be absorbed into his bloodstream long after he fell unconscious. By the next morning, he'd basically embalmed himself. Now, it's legal to drive if your blood alcohol content is below 0.08%. That's roughly 1 drink. At about 6 to 10 standard drinks in, your blood alcohol level is around 0.20%, and you generally need assistance walking. Vomiting and blacking out is also on the cards. Alcohol poisoning and a loss of consciousness sets in when your blood alcohol content is at around 0.25%, which is like consuming 20 to 30 standard drinks. At 0.40%, your body begins to shut down irreversibly. And our Darwin Award winner's blood alcohol content was a staggering 0.47%. Wow, this guy must have had bowels of steel. Live wire. When inmate Michael Godwin had his death penalty commuted to a life sentence, he was grateful to be able to walk away from death row. But it seems that karma had other plans. One night in 1989, he discovered the television in his cell was broken, and deciding to fix it himself, embarked on a little DIY. Foolishly, he thought it would be a great idea to use his teeth instead of a wire cutter. Biting down on a live wire, he electrocuted himself, not helped by the fact that he was sitting on a metal toilet at the time. Godwin may have escaped the electric chair, but it seems destiny was intent on seeing him die by electrocution. Number 19. Airless Airhead. When a Brazilian farmer discovered a beehive on his property in 2002, he knew precisely two things. Bees can sting, and they need to be removed with fire. No one knows why he decided that fire was his best option. All we do know is that he fashioned a makeshift helmet from a plastic bag to save himself from both the smoke and the bee stings. But besides all his careful planning, he didn't bother to think that he might have to breathe. And
this idiot didn't poke a blowhole in the trash bag he was wearing on his face.
He thought he made an oxygen bubble.
He been watching too much SpongeBob SquarePants, nigga. That shit don't work for everybody other than Sandy, nigga.
Failed to poke air holes into the plastic bag. When he didn't return home, his wife set out to find him and soon discovered him suffocated beneath the beehive. He was untouched by the bees, though. Number 18. Chimney grenade. One afternoon in 2005, Marco decided to clean the chimney in his workshop, but when he tried to use a simple broom, he realized it was too small for the job. Clearly, he had to improvise. He decided what he needed was a chain to pull the broom through the chimney and a heavy object to weigh it down. Looking in his workshop, he thought he'd found the perfect thing: a grenade. All he had to do now was weld it to the broom and chain. Except he failed to think about what could happen as he switched on his welding equipment. As soon as the flame met the grenade, it exploded, killing him instantly. The chimney, however, was left completely untouched by the blast. Number 7.
He deserved to die. He deserved to die, man.
Why does this nigga have a grenade in his workhouse?
17. Behind enema lines. Texas shop owner Michael was an alcoholic, but not an ordinary one. Due to a painful throat condition, he couldn't drink through his mouth. This meant he had to find other ways to consume his liquor, and his wife said he soon became addicted to enemas. This popular method is far more dangerous, as alcohol is absorbed directly through the capillaries in the rectum. So one night he wanted to get blind drunk and decided the only way to do it was to pour 100 fluid ounces of sherry up his rear end. What he didn't know was that after he'd passed out, the alcohol kept absorbing and he was dead by the morning.
Why is he black? I didn't expect for him to be black.
That must have hurt. Alcohol up the hole?
Probably not to him. He was on that other shit.
The toxicology report stated he had a blood alcohol level of 0.47%, meaning he'd pretty much embalmed himself. Number 16. Parking brake fail. When we're constantly reminded to recycle, plastic bags can be a source of annoyance. So when a 58-year-old Australian woman was driving to the grocery store and thought she'd forgotten her plastic bags, she promptly stopped her car to check the trunk. If only she was more worried about her parking than she was about her grocery bags, she would have remembered to put the handbrake on. As she checked the trunk, the car began rolling backwards, crushing her to death. Somehow she managed to run herself over. Number 15.
With her own car!
Irresponsible. A Romanian man in 2002 decided he would skip checking the local train schedules and instead deduce if the train was coming through the power of his own ears.
Oh boy.
Lying on the railway line, he pressed his ears to the tracks to hear if the train was approaching.
Really
Clearly his hearing wasn't all he thought it was, because he never heard it coming. He was hit by an oncoming express train and died immediately. Number 14. Lava La Vida Loca. Don't you just hate it when your lava lamp doesn't heat up quickly enough? Well, 24-year-old Philip did. After plugging in his lava lamp and waiting a few minutes, he was disappointed to see that nothing was happening. Eager to get it working, he decided to speed up the process by placing it on a hot stove. But with the contents of a lava lamp only being designed to withstand temperatures of up to 40 degrees,
It's lava, ain't it?
That's not how it works.
Everyone knows that lava can be reheated on an open flame. Huh? This is a smart way to do this.
it quickly overheated and exploded.
Oh my
Poor
God.
Philip was killed when the glass from the lamp shattered and penetrated his heart. Not so groovy. Number 13. Under pressure. Two bored comrades in a Romanian aluminum factory decided to have some fun
my
with an
God.
air hose actually used for industrial machinery.
Hey, they
When
let these
blowing
hoes
dust
too.
off their clothes became boring, they cranked things up a notch and decided to remove their clothes entirely.
They tried having sex with the blowholes. Damn, man.
Things quickly moved below the belt when one of the guys decided he was going to see what happened when he pumped 6 bars of atmospheric pressure into his anus. Not only did he break employment regulations, but he also...
Oh no.
In what alternate universe of Marvel Capcom history does shoving a bunch of air into your anus end good?
I don't even want to know what that looks like catching somebody do that in person.
What was the expected end result? Did like come out of his nose?
Blow up?
We gonna see.
Not only did he break employment regulations, but he also broke right through his intestinal tract and he died within minutes from severe internal hemorrhaging. Number 12.
Painful way to
Danger
die.
Zone. In
Danger
2017,
zone.
2 United States Navy pilots got a little
His
too
insides
carried away
exploded.
with Top Gun when
Oh,
they
God.
decided to completely abandon safety regulations to perform daredevilish stunts. Reaching astonishing speeds while flying as low as 210 feet, a good 300
Oh, my
feet below
God.
their minimum permitted altitude, things were bound to take a downward turn as they swapped controls back and forth. Descending too low and slow, one of the pilots traded off controls to his co-pilot, but it was too late. The T-45C Goshawk crashed before they could safely eject themselves. Instructing pilot Lieutenant Birch was fond of the phrase, "There are old pilots and there are bold pilots." He failed to mention that there are also outrageously dumb ones.
Number 11.
Cruise control. The fastest human can run over 27 miles per hour, but that's only after accelerating during a run-up. A Dutch teenager in 2004 thought he could do better than that and get close to that speed straight away. In a bid to impress his friends, he set his car to cruise control at 20 miles per hour and told them he was going to jump out and run alongside the car before jumping back in and driving away. But his shocked friends could only look on as he stepped out the moving car and immediately smashed his head on the tarmac. He died the following day.
Number 10.
Nigga.
Treasure Hunt. Described as the world's largest treasure hunt, the geocaching app allows people to follow online clues and
fucked up to
find
laugh?
small treasure
is
boxes
not.
known as
You have to
geocaches
laugh.
hidden in their area. Sounds like harmless.
Otherwise, they won't learn no lesson. You have to laugh at people that finish themselves off in this type of manner. How else are they gonna learn to do any better?
Until someone decides to head down a flooded waterway in search of trinkets. When meteorologists warned the Czech Republic of impending rainstorms, most people paid attention. But not this group of geocachers who thought it would be clever to climb into an underground waterworks tunnel. Although 2 members of the group survived, 2 others were swept away, with 1 young man still reported missing.
Number 9.
Delicious.
Dying for a smoke.
Ooh.
Nobody likes long bus journeys. They're cramped and boring, not to mention you're basically sharing a tin can with dozens of strangers in their farts. One Scottish woman especially hated the idea of spending 12 hours stuck on a coach from Glasgow to London without a cigarette. Passengers reported that she grew increasingly agitated and watched in horror as she began throwing herself at the passenger door. The bus was traveling at 60 miles per hour when she tumbled out into the road before falling onto the wheels of the bus. Smoking really does kill.
Number 8.
Damn, bitch.
Footrest. Most people go to the movies to see the drama unfold on the screen, not
Beat
beside
stuff.
them. When a local man booked tickets in the VIP area of the cinema complex, he was hoping for a good time. What he got instead was a ticket to the Darwin Awards. After dropping his phone beneath his seat, he tried to retrieve it, only to get his head wedged inside the footrest. If this wasn't bad enough, he then suffered a cardiac arrest and died in hospital. Number
What?
7. Victoria Falls. 50-year-old Michael was a clever man. Not only was he a college headmaster, he was also a respected geography lecturer on the conferences circuit.
While on a trip to the Victoria Falls Bridge, he was happily taking photos of his girlfriend when he dropped his glasses over the edge. Thinking he wouldn't be able to enjoy the view of the glorious Victoria Falls without them, he tried to retrieve them, only to fall 40 feet to his death. Number 6. Killer Whalebone. This historic entry in...
At least let it be your cell phone, bro. Shit, like that's respectable. You know what I'm saying? Don't die for some bifocals, homie.
Save the nudes.
Like, yeah, this, bitch, I got nudes on there. No, Jessica, no.
Into the Darwin Award sees another clever man, founding father of the USA, Governor Morris, come to an untimely end through an eye-watering DIY medical procedure. When Morris began suffering from a blockage in his urethra, he took matters into his own hands.
No.
Inserting a whalebone into his urethra, all he managed to do was give himself a deadly infection. He died November 6, 1816. Probably feeling pretty silly. Number 5. Distracted driver. 58-year-old Clifford Jones was driving without a seatbelt. He was also driving without pants. When a regular drive just wasn't interesting enough, he decided to watch a bit of adult content on his phone and have some fun. If
this douchebag decided to beat his meat mobily, how close did he get? He was whipping the Tesla while whipping other stuff. Oh, goodness.
If only he'd kept his hands on the wheel. With the blood rushing away from his head, he grew increasingly distracted and lost control of his car. As it crashed, he hurtled through the sunroof and died on impact.
I bet he died in the doggy style position. Ass naked, butt right up in the air. Good Lord.
Number 4. Posing with a grenade.
Oh, boy.
Faking a smile, posing with angry animals, posing with a primed grenade. All things people will do for attention online.
People aren't smart.
Yes, you heard me right. In 2017, Alexander Sasha Chechik from Russia pulled the pin out of a hand grenade while in his car and posted photographs of himself holding it to his girlfriend, probably as a way to show off his balls of brainless steel. A source who spoke to the Russian news service reporting the incident said, "The guy didn't manage to insert the hand grenade pin back in. The pin is the safety mechanism. It's the lever on the side of the firing mechanism that activates the grenade when released. However, it's still not worth risking it by removing the pin." Police categorized his death as an accident and not suicide, as they believed he thought it wouldn't explode as long as he didn't throw it. Number 3. Bear.
Isn't that the way it works?
Even if you take the pin out, there's still a timer. Like, you can't hold it for mad long.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like what? You got like 5 seconds to throw that bitch after the shit's out.
Well, now I know I won't be holding any hand grenades.
Selfie. Prabhu Batara
Yeah,
from India was
cocaine
on his way
bear.
home from a wedding when he spotted a black bear. Seeing this,
Why the bear gotta be black? Y'all see the little stuff they be doing? They be peppering it into the content now. Yep, stay woke.
as a great photo opportunity, he got close to the bear and attempted to take a selfie with it. As he did, the bear mauled him. He died shortly after due to his injuries. My advice, stay far away from bears. They may be cute, but if you photograph them at an angle that makes them look fat, it's game over.
Yep.
Number 2. Sawing into a grenade. 2 pathologists
Again?
at a German symposium
Another
dinner
one.
told the tale of a man who stumbled across a World War II grenade.
We the
Instead of
best
staying well
music.
clear, he wanted to open it up to see how it worked. Back
No.
home, he placed it inside a vise and tried to saw it perfectly in half. The saw detonated the grenade and the man died from a fatal head injury. Upon post-mortem, it was discovered there was very little brain matter left inside his skull, although
Yep.
the 2 pathologists joked that there couldn't have been much to start with. Before we get to our
Damn.
number 1 dumbest Darwin Award, here are a few
That's
honorable mentions.
funny.
There's this man who planked
What?
on a tiger. There's no way he walked away from that one. Then there's this guy who bit a tiger's tail. Wait, is that the same guy? Poor tiger. Oh, and this woman who got something stuck in her handgun. Nice.
Nut.
Okay, so back to the final award in our countdown. Number 1. Smoking Hot. Gary Banning from North Carolina was at his friend's house when he spotted a mysterious jar of tasty-looking liquid. Assuming it was hot sauce and without bothering to check, he flipped off the lid and started to drink it. But he soon discovered it wasn't hot sauce at all.
Yep, I was refrigerating my poop for a science project. Joke's on you, but if you didn't add sugar, I'll tell you this, it's not gonna be a good day for you.
But a jar of gasoline.
Terrible.
The shock of chugging gasoline was too
Gasoline?
much for Gary, so he spat it out, then tried to calm down with a cigarette. As soon as he lit it, he caught fire and died the next day from his injuries. So
What?
which of these Darwin Award winners do you think is the
Motherfucker.
Runway cyclist. Unless you've got ET in your basket, you probably shouldn't be cycling on an airport runway. This advice never reached Brazilian cyclist Marcelo, who was crossing an airfield near Sao Paulo while listening to his Walkman. Yes, it was 1997, but that's no excuse. The 25-year-old was totally clueless as he collided with the propeller of a landing
Oh.
How did he get on the airfield?
Shredded cheese his ass.
plane, mangling the blades and damaging the wing in the process.
The plane probably did see him. I would have kept going. I beat my horn. He should have moved. What?
I'd usually say, wear a helmet, folks, but in this case, I'm not sure that would have helped.
Yeah.
Number 16, fast food fatality. In an attempt to rip off their workplace, two managers at Burger King cooked up a whopper of a plan. Staging a fake robbery and arson in order to steal over $4,000 from the restaurant.
Motherfucker. Bro, that's like 2 months worth of living expenses if you're frugal. What are you doing?
22-year-old night manager Lisa was bound with duct tape and shut into the walk-in cooler by her accomplice. Unluckily for Lisa, the fire department didn't show up until the morning when she was found freezing and semi-conscious. She later died in the hospital from hypothermia. According to investigators, Lisa could have easily freed herself from her bindings and escaped the unlocked refrigerator, which is exactly why she makes the list. Number 15. Tiger toy. Playing with your food is an unattractive habit, but some creatures just can't help it. A mugger in South Africa found this out the hard way after robbing a couple at knife
You gonna rob a bitch at safety pinpoint? That's some thug shit. I never thought to do that.
point. The mugger fled the scene and clambered over a nearby fence.
Oh, shit.
What he'd forgotten was that he was at Bloemfontein Zoo, and
Mother
the fences
shit.
were there for a reason.
Motherfuckers.
Suddenly, an ambush of bored Bengal tigers was
Rape!
upon him, and he quickly
Rape!
became their new plaything.
Rape!
After the body was found, a zoo spokesperson said the tigers had been fed the previous afternoon. Otherwise, there would have been nothing left. Number 14. A head for chemistry. In the age of pipe blockages and fatbergs, we should know by now not to mess with the sewers. In 2008, a biology teacher from Sofia, Bulgaria was driving home with two friends. Bystanders saw her car come to a sudden stop, and all three passengers got out and started pouring leftover jars of chemicals down a manhole. These noxious chemicals included diethyl ether and methanol, both highly flammable liquids. The cocktail of chemicals in the enclosed space of the sewers caused an explosion so powerful that the manhole cover was launched into the air, instantly decapitating the polluting teacher. The moral of the story? Don't mess with chemicals, or you could lose your head. Number 13. Flaming rodeo.
Living
If
the Captain
this isn't
Planet,
an example
kids.
of you should have known better, I don't know what is. In Washington in 2010, during the American Sprint Car Series, two crew members dreamed up an insane thrill ride. They poured 4 gallons of methanol into a 55-gallon barrel, sat on the barrel, then lit the bomb.
That's a good idea.
These two bright sparks thought the barrel would shoot across the parking lot like a rocket, and
And even if it did, it would still fuck them up.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, what was the plan here?
in some kind of fiery rodeo. What they'd actually created was a makeshift bomb, which quickly blew them sky high.
Yep.
Both men ended up in the hospital, and one of them died.
Oh,
Not
one
sure I
survived.
want to think about the aftermath between their legs.
Oh my
Number
God.
12. Suddenly
Yep.
sluggish.
Penis
Most
probably
people
gone.
wouldn't have the guts to eat a slug. Turns out this guy didn't either. A young rugby player called Sam from Sydney, Australia was at a party in 2010 when the slug sped across the table. His friends dared him to eat it, and he did.
Motherfucker, what?
Not long afterwards, Sam contracted a rat lungworm, a parasitic worm spread by rodents. The parasite infested Sam's brain, putting him in a coma and leaving him paralyzed. Several years later, he died as a result of this prank gone wrong. I'm not sure I even have to tell you this, folks, but seriously, don't eat slugs. Number 11. Headless chickens. In 1997, a group of co-workers in Holland were on a tour bus, and some of the bolder employees stuck their heads out of the window to enjoy the air. You'd think you'd notice a tunnel approaching down the road, but two men kept their heads out as the bus entered a viaduct, and by this point, it was too late. The two men were not decapitated, but suffered severe head trauma and snapped necks, killing them both instantly. Way to ruin the field trip, guys. Number 10. Fatal footsie. We've all heard stories of idiots playing Russian roulette, but this one tops them all. In 1999, Cambodia was littered with all kinds of discarded weaponry after decades of armed conflict. In a place called Svay Rieng, 3 friends had spent the evening drinking. After hours of arguing, one of the men pulled out a 25-year-old unexploded anti-tank mine he'd found in his backyard. The man then tossed it under the table, and the 3 men began taking turns to first drink, then stomp on the mine. Other villagers fled in terror, and minutes later, an enormous explosion occurred, killing all 3 men.
Yep,
Personally,
that's what
I
happens.
think the gene pool might have benefited from this one, don't you?
Delicious.
Number 9.
this so
Domestic
simple, it's
disturbance.
Nigga.
Arguing with your partner can
I ain't
be an
doing it.
emotional roller coaster, but this man's reaction was shocking. In Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1998, a man decided that the best way to win an argument with his wife was to pick her up and throw her off the balcony. They were 8 floors up, but bizarrely, the woman became entangled in the power lines below. In what may have been an effort to save her, or maybe finish her off, the man leapt from the balcony, aiming for the wires. The airborne abuser missed the wires completely, plunging to his death. Somehow, his wife managed to swing to a nearby balcony and was subsequently rescued. I'm no Buddhist, but that's karma.
That is karma to the max.
That is karma to the max for real, yo.
Oh!
That is wild, dude. No! This nigga tried to people's elbow this bitch out. No! He got a bitch. No!
This nigga thought he was Tarzan.
He tried to fatality this hoe.
Number 8. Gasso Clean. Keeping box fresh trainers clean is a must, but this method might be going too far. In 1998, 67-year-old Texan Reva Nix was washing her tennis shoes. Wait for it, with gasoline. When the shoes, which she was still wearing, were ignited by a nearby candle. Reva had to run with flaming feet to her neighbor's house, who quickly doused her feet with a hose. It was too late, however, and Reva later died from her burns. The local sheriff warned others against using gasoline in this way, since it was apparently common practice. I guess that's Texas for you. Number 7.
Bitch died by hot feet. Texas toast.
Texas
That's what her
toes.
feet was.
Texas toes.
Nigga, Texas toes, baby. Yup. Hey, she just nigga.
Consider it car thief. Some people have pretty
Yeah,
twisted moral codes, but
Set
this
himself
car
on
thief
fire.
from Pittsburgh had a bit
It's
of
her
logic
fault.
to his larceny. Randy
I said
Nestor
myself
stole
fire, y'all
plenty of
myself.
cars, and whenever a
Yeah.
stolen vehicle became hot, he'd torch it, reasoning that the fire damage would help the owners collect on the insurance. Pretty thoughtful, right? It turns out Randy was the victim of his own virtue when he set fire to a van that he was still inside. On trying to escape, Randy found that the driver's side handle was broken and the door locked. Randy burned up inside the van and was pretty much killed by his own kindness and stupidity. Number 6.
Had him coming up fresh out this bitch. Burger King his ass to death. Slow roasted like a rotisserie chicken. And I only say that because I'm hungry as shit right now.
Pretty and pigeon. It seems that idiots are drawn to power lines like moths to a flame. Here, the infamous Florida man returns with a tale that would have Thomas Edison facepalming in his grave. When Elian Garcia Rivera's pet pigeon decided to perch on a power line, he thought the best way to dislodge his feathered friend would be to retrieve a 20-foot-long aluminum pool pole and jab it into the high-voltage wires. This Floridian only succeeded in turning himself into a human superconductor and was killed instantly. If only this Florida man had listened a little more in science class. Number 5. Time zone terrorists. Daylight savings time causes a lot of confusion, but in this instance, it proved fatal. In 1999, Israel turned the clocks back a day early, but Palestinians refused to accept this Zionist time, except for 4 terrorists who'd planned a bombing that day. Their bombs were set to go off at 6:30 p.m., but poor communication meant the would-be bombers were an hour behind schedule. The explosives detonated while the terrorists were en route, preventing any further bloodshed. I think we can say these dummies got what they deserved. A one-way
Karma.
ticket to the afterlife. Number 4.
crazy.
Faithful
Yep.
flotation.
That's
I'll
funny.
admit, I've tried to walk on water. Anyone who says they haven't taken a run at a pool with the hopes of making it across is probably lying. So when in 2016 a Zimbabwean pastor promised he would walk out into a river and rise above the water, his congregation were intrigued. After fasting for a week, the pastor waded 30 meters into a river known as Crocodile River. You'd think the name might have put him off, but no. Pastor Jonathan was devoured by 3 hungry crocodiles before he even had the chance to perform his miracle. So much for divine intervention. Number 3. Peeping Tom. People love to catch a glimpse of something they're not supposed to see, like this Calgary man who died in a shopping mall last year. Though his motives were unknown, I think it's pretty obvious what this guy was up to when he climbed through a vent in order to access the area behind a wall in the women's bathrooms. The man became trapped there and was found dead 3 days later.
Dude, seeing anus, it's never that serious.
How did he even get in there anyways?
That's real talk. Just buy females bath water. Matter of fact, I'm selling bath water on my Only Toes. You can buy it. It's this, shit.
Police have not revealed the cause of death, but it's safe to say this peeping Tom got a little more excitement than he bargained for. Number 2. Just buy a ticket. There are smart ways to save money, and there are dumb ways to save money. And then there's this guy. Mr. Zhang was visiting Ningbo Younger Zoo in China with his family when he realized he couldn't afford the $20 to buy a ticket for himself. So he doubled back and decided to scale the fence in order to access the zoo. After a successful climb, Mr. Zhang landed in the tiger enclosure and was set up by a trio of tigers who quickly ripped him to pieces. I guess he paid the price after all. Number 1. Stings in the tail. The Asian giant hornet is the world's biggest hornet, and it's the stuff of nightmares. Large, aggressive, and venomous, a swarm of these insects can kill a human, and they do. Around 40 people are killed in Japan each year by hornet stings. So the last thing you should do is bug them. In this hilarious yet shocking video, a Chinese man is shown dancing with a hornet's nest and throwing it about after removing it. If you want to elicit stings from dangerous flying creatures, tearing their house down and juggling
Oh my God, they're like small birds!
Even with his protective suit, the man suffers multiple stings and is later shown being carried off on a stretcher, his body stiff and full of venom. I think he needed a better suit.
The irony of dying while keeping fit. We'll give you just one famous example of a victim of irony, and that is the case of the former American jogging guru Jim Fixx. He wrote The Complete Book of Running in 1977, and it became a bestseller. In fact, he's said to be one of the main people that started what was called America's fitness revolution. Fixx had once been overweight and also a heavy smoker, but then he started his exercise regime, sold his books, and told the American people that running was the secret to having a long life and good health. He died of a heart attack while running when he was just 52 years old. Okay, so that's perhaps not so strange, and will get stranger, but we just wanted to give you an example of death by irony. 12. Death by clothing. You've all heard news media write stories about what it calls draconian laws or rules. This just usually means out-of-date laws or laws that seem way too strict or even brutal. We get this adjective from a Greek lawmaker called Draco. In Athens in the 7th century BC,
They had guns back then, and it was automatics. Young Draco's not gonna like this. I mean, but Soldier Boy, I think.
this man created laws that were said to be unfair, or at least unfair if you were not part of the wealthy group of people. His harsh legal code could mean cruel punishments for even petty crimes. Nonetheless, it said he was popular at the time with the crowds, but in those days, the public did seem to enjoy watching blood being spilled. It said during one appearance in the Eugenian Theater, the crowd wanted to show their adoration, so they threw their hats, cloaks, and shirts at him. But they went overboard, and it said Draco suffocated under the avalanche of clothing from his admirers. We should say that this is an old story passed down, so one might question how it actually happened. Maybe they meant to kill him.
What, the clothes have bricks in them? How do you die by having clothing thrown at you?
But we'll never know what happened that fateful day. 11. Death by proving that something is safe.
What?
You may have heard about this one as it's popped up in various TV series from time to time. The story is of a Canadian lawyer called Gary Hoy. On July 9th, 1993, he was taking people on a tour of the Toronto Dominion Centre, a building of many floors with a lot of glass windows. He wanted to demonstrate to the people just how strong the windows were, as rightly some folks were concerned about such a high glass-fronted building. To do this, he did something he'd done before and threw himself at a glass window to show that the glass was very strong.
Very smart. It's like he's taste testing for danger, but with his body. Brilliant stuff.
He was right that the glass didn't smash, but on this occasion, the window popped out of its frame and Hoy fell a long way to his death. An engineer later told the Canadian media, "I don't know of any building code in the world that would allow a 160-pound man to run up against the glass and withstand it. That might have been some shock for the bystanders." 10. Same but different. This is another story of a lawyer trying to prove a point to people and in doing so, killed himself. The man was an American lawyer called Clement Vallandigham, and in 1871 he was representing a client that was accused of murder. The lawyer was trying to prove that the victim wasn't murdered but had accidentally killed himself. He tried to show how this might have happened and accidentally shot himself. He died, but his client got off the murder charge. 9.
Wow.
Death by beard. A tourism website in Austria tells us that people can visit the epitaph of a man called Hans Steininger.
Was it onlyfans.com? We gonna edit that out.
He was a mayor of Braunau in the 16th century and was well known for having a really long beard. We're told it was so long that if not tied, it would trail on the floor. One day, the poor guy was walking down the street and he tripped on his own beard, broke his neck, and died. To this day, his beard is kept in the local museum. 8. Death by banana. Slipping on a banana skin is perhaps the best known gag joke. And
What was you driving a Mario Kart? How you slip and die off a banana peel?
of course, it doesn't happen very often, but searching online, we can find one death certificate from 1927 that did indeed blame a banana skin for the death of a man. The 74-year-old slipped and died in Tennessee. 7. Death by piano. If people do actually die from slipping on banana skins, do they also die by a piano falling on their heads? Well, someone actually investigated this, and that writer found at least one incident when a piano being pulled up a building had come crashing down on a person below. The website Straight Dope writes, in 1931 a piano was being hoisted up to a second-story window when a cornice broke free from the building, falling and killing a mover below. But perhaps the most famous piano death out there was that of a strip club bouncer called Jimmy Ferrozzo. In 1983, at a club in San Francisco, he and his girlfriend had been making love on a piano that was connected to a hoist so it could be lowered down for performances and raised when it wasn't being used. This time, the piano was down on the floor, but during the act of passion, one of the two accidentally hit the switch and the piano was pulled up. Jimmy was consequently crushed against the ceiling, but we are told his lover survived the incident. 6. Killed by a bird. We can actually find a few instances of people being killed by birds.
Birds ain't shit. Birds ain't never been shit. They ain't never gonna be shit. Watch your back, men. They out here in full effect.
But this one has to be the strangest. It also involves a fair bit of karma. In 2011, a 35-year-old California resident called Jose Luis Ochoa was stabbed to death by a bird. The BBC writes that the man had been at an illegal cockfight and had taken with him a cock that had sharp spurs on its legs, which were more like little knives. The bird apparently turned on its owner and he suffered what the coroner called a sharp force injury. A police spokesperson told the media, "I have never seen this type of an incident." No kidding. 5. Killing your son. The snake. In 2013, a Japanese man called Takuya Nagaya had apparently been acting a bit weird at his parents' apartment in Okazaki City. He'd been slithering around like a snake. Of course, his father came to the rational conclusion that his son had been possessed by some kind of snake demon. He then did the next rational thing and took matters into his own hands.
there it
Well, we should say head and teeth. Reports tell us his son died from injuries sustained while the father was trying to get the snake out of him by biting and headbutting him. You can only imagine what the scene must have looked like.
What?
4. A cow through the roof. The BBC reported in 2013 that a Brazilian man was killed in his bed when
The BBC, huh? Oh boy.
a cow came crashing down through his roof. Somehow, the rather large animal got into his asbestos roof and fell right through it. Apparently, this wasn't the first time a cow had fallen through a roof in this rural area. The 45-year-old died from internal bleeding. 3. Death by slug. Many of us might have done some silly things just because we were dared to do it, or we wanted to win some money or just show off. This goes wrong all the time, and you can find endless video clips of Darwin Award types of stunts online. In November 2018, the world's media reported the death of an Australian man called Sam Ballard, who had died aged 28. 8 years prior to his death, the skilled rugby player had been at a party with friends in Sydney. No doubt quite a bit of alcohol had been consumed, and during the party, a slug turned up on the scene. Ballard's friends, writes The Independent, dared him to eat the slug. That he did, but as a result, he became very sick. He was taken to a hospital, and it was found later that he had been infected by a parasite known as rat lungworm. This ended up paralyzing the young man and was the reason he died some years later. 2. Death by cockroach. You shouldn't eat slugs, and you also probably shouldn't eat cockroaches. The BBC tells us that in 2012, a man from Florida by the name of Edward Archbold had entered himself into a live cockroach eating competition. He had done well, devouring dozens of the creatures, but it also killed him. The coroner ruled that his death was caused by asphyxia due to choking and aspiration of gastric contents. In short, he had choked on cockroach body parts. 1. The body of Christ. We know that some Christians will take into their mouths something that symbolizes the body of Christ. But one Canadian man took this a step further in 1987. According to the Toronto Globe and Mail,
Did he eat the Holy Bible? That's what we call the Holy Bible in the streets. I really love the way it sounds because white people don't know what it means yet, and we only got about a good 3 more weeks until it gets out.
a man called Franco Brune had been taken in by police and left in the cells. It turns out that in the cell, the man had made use of a small Gideon's Bible by swallowing it. He choked to death on it. News reports tell us that for this mentally unwell man, the swallowing of the Bible to him was some form of symbolism or allegory, as though he was trying to purge himself of the devil by consuming religion. What's the strangest death you've heard about?
From picking up live grenades to getting electrocuted by a toilet and more, here are 10 of some of the dumbest ways people have died. Number 10. Grenade selfie. There are certain things you're supposed to know not to mess with, and potentially dangerous explosives, well, they're one of those things. 2 men were traveling in Russia when they came across a live grenade. In this case, it was a grenade that just so happened to have the pin pulled out, which for those of you who don't know, that means the grenade is armed and could very easily explode. Obviously, the reason it wasn't already detonated was a fault in the system, which you might think means it was okay to pick up, and yet the opposite was true. That just made it even more dangerous. The 2 men didn't know that and decided it would be a great idea to pick up the grenade and then take a selfie with it. As you might expect, they didn't survive the experience. In fact, the grenade blew up mid-photo shoot. But rather ironically, while the men died, the phone somehow survived, and thus was used as evidence to show how the 2 men died. Usually that would be the end of this dumb cause of death, but
Bro, I'm trying to see the selfie they took, man. I want to see the picture.
here's the twist. This was just one case of selfies gone wrong to the extreme degree, because Russia had a slew of them that prompted the government to issue warnings about taking selfies with dangerous objects. A cool selfie could cost you your life, the Interior Minister warned in a new leaflet packed with tips, such as a selfie with a weapon kills. Yeah, it's true. A slew of Russian people were taking pictures with loaded weapons and other munitions because they thought it would make a great shot. And it turns out they were wrong. Very, very wrong. Number 9. Michael Goodwin. The case of Michael Goodwin is one of many layers. He was originally slated to be put to death, but then a change in his sentencing came in and he was given the punishment of life in prison. A change of good fortune, or at least it should have been. Living in his cell was fine, until one day he realized that the TV he had in it, due to good behavior, wasn't working. He examined it and eventually realized there was a bad wire. After taking stock of the situation and his own skill set, Goodwin felt the best option was to cut the wire with his teeth. And this was dumb on many levels, not the least of which was that due to it being a live wire, it was literally full of electricity, and thus he was electrocuted. But technically, that's not the end of the story, because there was a chance that the electrocution from the live wire wouldn't have killed him. But the repair work he was doing, he did via a metal toilet. So that amped up the power of the jolt that killed him. Ironically enough, though, Goodwin was supposed to be electrocuted before his change in sentence. His stupidity changed it back to the original verdict. How Not to Get Away with Bee Murder. In 2002, a farmer in Brazil was going about his property and realized that there was a massive beehive there waiting for him. Bees can be very dangerous and potentially deadly depending on the species and a person's reaction to their painful stings. So thus caution was needed, and he did just that to an extent. To get rid of the bees, the man realized he needed to protect himself from the stings and then use fire to get rid of the hive, which in this case was a good two-part plan, more or less. He went and prepared to burn the bees away. His idea of protecting himself was putting a plastic bag over his head and sealing it tight. And if you're already seeing the problem with this, then you'd be much smarter than this man. Not the least of which is a plastic bag wouldn't stop bee stings. But it gets worse, because he forgot about having to breathe. He didn't put holes in the bag so oxygen could get through, and thus he found himself suffocated by the tree where the bees were still very much alive. Number 7, backwards thinking. Driving is dangerous no matter what people like to think. There are many accidents on the roads of the world every single day, and things can happen when you don't think things through. Even an act as simple as parking. A certain 58-year-old woman from Australia, for example, forgot something rather important one day, to put her car in park, and it cost her big. So how did this happen? First and foremost, the reason she stopped the car on the way to the grocery store was because she wondered if she'd remembered the plastic bags in the trunk. Those plastic bags she used a lot thanks to a recycling mindset. So she responsibly pulled over, got out of the car, and checked the trunk. But this was the fatal mistake, because when she was doing this act, the car, which was not in park, started to roll backwards right when she was behind it, thus knocking her down and running her over, and the woman died. Not the way she expected the day would go, no doubt.
Get ran over by your own car. What type of traitorous shit is this?
Number 6, game over. There are many people who think that video games can have rather addictive properties, to the extent that some gamers will play the games they love for many hours on end. Now, there are parts of that can be very true, but usually these are very dedicated gamers and not the normal set. However, in South Korea, video gaming is a lifestyle, as one man named Lee tried not just to do, but to embody. During one session with the game StarCraft, he decided to play for 50 hours straight, without eating, without sleeping, without taking care of his body in general. The only breaks he took were to go to the bathroom when he really couldn't hold it anymore. If you can see the problem with this, then you know where this is going, because after playing for those 50 hours and not taking care of his body,
he shit on himself, deep and hard.
He died. Doctors cite that it was a mix of heart failure and exhaustion that caused his sudden death, both of which could have been easily prevented if he just went and did very basic things like sleep for even a few hours and get something to eat in the course of 10 to 15 minutes after every few hours. So thus he died trying to live a lifestyle that was literally unobtainable, a lesson for all of us for sure. Number 5, lava lamp bomb. There are many ways to decorate rooms, but one that is very popular with people is lava lamps. That being said, there are rules to follow when first getting them and heating them up. Mainly do it slowly or else. Enter Philip, who did not want to follow this rule at all.
Who heats up a lava lamp in the first place?
Because he wanted to see his lava lamp in full flow. Being impatient, he decided to put the lamp on the stove and use its heat to make the lava lamp go. And it should be noted that doing this is in direct contradiction to the warnings on the label of the item. After a little while, the lamp exploded from the pressure, and the shards of glass that were launched from the lamp went straight into Philip, killing him. This story was so pervasive that Mythbusters actually tested the circumstances, and they found it could be done in the right situation, though Philip did prove that himself, tragically enough. Number 4. Did you hear something? The notion of things coming out of the sky to kill you is not new. However, something you wouldn't expect to be killed by without noticing it is a helicopter coming down on you.
Yeah.
Yet in British Columbia, a student in the area was indeed killed when a helicopter crashed into the ground and killed him. The obvious question that would need to be asked here is, why didn't he see or hear anything? The first answer is because he wasn't facing the correct direction apparently, which I guess makes sense. And the second part to that question is that the student had headphones on with the volume turned up real loud, which was later confirmed by an eyewitness. So thus, even when a massive piece of machinery was heading his way, he couldn't hear it. Thus, he got hit and died. The people in the helicopter died as well, and the whole incident was marked as very strange. Number 3. Clean sweep. In today's day and age, a chimney is not as standard in homes as they used to be in the past decades, mainly because modern advances in heating make them less useful, and they can be a bit of a pain to clean. And should you not clean them, you risk burning down your home. Enter Marco, who was a man with a chimney in his house. He started to clean his chimney in the basic way by using a broom, but he realized that it just wouldn't work. So he had a creative idea. Using a chain and a weight, he could have the broom go all the way through the chimney without much effort. All in all, kinda not a bad idea, but the weight aspect of this plan is where things got dumb, because he decided to use a grenade.
No.
But wait, there's more.
No.
Because not only was he using a potentially explosive device to send down a chimney, he also felt he needed to make sure it didn't get off the chain he was tying it to, so he welded it on. Once the welding fire touched it, it exploded and Marco was killed. That's what happens when you really don't think plans like these through. Number 2, getting big air. For those who don't know, kite surfing is a respected endeavor in which people use kites that are like parachutes to skate across the water and sometimes get really big air. It's a complicated thing, but to those who know what they're doing, it can be quite the rush. However, the thing you must look out for is the massive wind currents, because they can literally spell your doom. And that's what happened to Adrian Monnoyer. During a particularly windy day, weather reports told surfers to stay off the oceans. But many, including Adrian, refused and thus went kite surfing. As Adrian was doing this, he got caught up in a gale of wind that was 100 miles per hour. It was so strong that it literally lifted him up into the air and sent him inland,
Into the side of someone's house.
to which he would go and hit many buildings with his body,
Knew it.
including a massive hotel.
Yep.
And then after finally being disconnected from his kite, he would fall to his death from 50 feet up.
Yep.
This bizarre death could have easily been avoided, but it wasn't because of the thrill of the sport.
Yeah, he was doing
Number
too
1,
much.
stay in the vehicle. When you go on a safari, especially one that has various animals of incredible sizes, one of the most important rules is to not leave the vehicle at any point unless specifically told. And this is
Not even if it is to have consensual intercourse with said animals. No matter what the animals tell you, don't do them. And I learned that from the Magic School Bus. Miss Frizzle was on that other shit.
for people's safety as well as the safety of the animals. But for 2 elderly German tourists at a Spanish safari, they decided not to heed the many warnings that were put across the safari park and get out of the vehicle to go and enjoy the animals more. As if to prove the point, near immediately after they got out of the car, a set of tigers pounced upon them and killed them both.
Oh!
The park didn't release too much information about the couple, but it was clear that they didn't obey the rules, and it literally cost them their lives. Thanks for watching. What did you think of these incredibly dumb deaths by people who honestly could have known better?
That's kind of attractive.
We all know a guy who cares more about seeming like the manliest man than his own personal safety. But for one unfortunate fellow from Pato Branco, Brazil, wanting to appear tough resulted in the opposite effect, and ultimately, his demise. When the 48-year-old climbed into bed one night, he felt a sudden twinge of pain on his leg. Pulling back the sheets, he spotted a Brazilian brown spider, which, upon being joined in bed uninvited, had bitten him. These little critters might not look as scary as some of our planet's other arachnids, but their venom packs a seriously painful punch. If left untreated, Brazilian brown spider bites can lead to infections and serious health problems. For this man, though, despite the intense pain, the other symptoms weren't so obvious. At first. Not that he paid his symptoms any mind anyway, as despite his family's insistence, he refused to get the bite checked out by a doctor. Within a matter of days, however, his body had begun to swell up, his legs became virtually unresponsive, and his kidneys began to fail. By the time he finally put his ego aside, it was too late. He died in the hospital, leaving behind a clear lesson to all macho men.
You can outmuscle many things in life, brother, but a venomous spider bite ain't one of them.
Gnarly bail, dude. There's nothing wrong with being a thrill seeker, just as long as the thrills you seek aren't laced with total stupidity.
None?
Unfortunately, the thrills this next Darwin Award recipient sought out contained lethal doses of idiocy, far exceeding the government's daily recommendations of a single spoonful. While hitting the slopes at Bogus Basin in Idaho, one snowboarder decided the allocated ski areas just weren't exciting enough, and decided to up the thrill factor in a supremely stupid way. Without taking any precautions to check for traffic, he decided to attempt to jump over the main road leading to the top of the mountain. Unfortunately, this particular road happened to be in regular use, but the bird-brained boarder attempted to clear it anyway. But when the trick proved to be an utter failure, the snowboarder didn't just have the embarrassment to contend with. He also had the SUV coming directly at him with no time to react and nowhere to swerve to worry about. But he didn't have to worry for too long because he wasn't wearing a helmet, and the impact the SUV made was so severe it killed him almost instantly. Gnarly. Holy moly. There are many things that can go wrong in a burglary attempt. The homeowners might catch you in the act, there might be an angry Doberman with a taste for burglars waiting for you inside. You might even fall through the ceiling 24 feet to the floor below. Well, that last one is a little less likely, but it's exactly what happened to one burglar in Nevada in 2019. While trying to cut himself an entry point into the roof of a hair salon in Carson City, he lost his footing, falling straight into the hole he'd just made. With the ceiling being over 20 feet high as he fell, the burglar must have been hoping he'd land in the comfort of a barber's chair rather than on an upturned pair of scissors. But neither outcome occurred, as instead he crashed straight down onto the cold, hard floor and was killed instantly. Needless to say, there are better ways to get a free haircut, and none of them involve cutting holes in ceilings. Having a blast. There are many ways a person can annoy their neighbors when living in a small apartment complex. Loud music, annoying pets, and parties are the usual problems. But for an apartment block in Tiraspol, Moldova, one problematic neighbor made a bang that was more than just noisy. On a quiet afternoon in February 2019, residents of the apartment complex were suddenly met with an almighty boom. As glass exploded out from one apartment window into the street below, the emergency services were called to investigate. When police arrived, the apartment block's gas was shut off, as it was initially assumed a gas leak had caused the explosion. But as the police began to piece the mystery together, a gas explosion was quickly ruled out in favor of something much more ridiculous. It turned out the owner of the apartment in which the explosion had occurred was somewhat of a military enthusiast. He had a large assortment of weapons in his room, including grenades, and had somehow managed to set one off while perusing his collection. The blast from the hand grenade obliterated his apartment, but miraculously left the rest of the complex largely untouched. Unsurprisingly though, the grenade-toting apartment owner himself was very much dead when the police arrived. Hand grenades. Not even once. Felt cute. Might delete myself. Certain people will go to great lengths nowadays for the perfect Instagram photo opportunity. After all, how are people going to know how much fun their lives are without plastering it all over social media? Sarcastic though my tone may be, this mindset is very much real for some folk. And what's more, desperation for a great pic at any cost has forcibly removed a select few from the gene pool in recent years. One such case happened to a student at Fordham University in New York back in 2019. Late one night, she and her friends had the not-so-bright idea to climb an off-limits clock tower on campus, hoping to snap a few Insta-worthy pics at the top. But whether it was the excitement of a photo op or just the darkness of the evening, during the ascent, the student made a fatal mistake. Somehow, she managed to fall out of an open alcove and over the edge, plummeting to the lower roof of the building. With serious injuries sustained from her fall, she died shortly afterwards. She did reportedly manage to snap a few pics before falling, but she never even got to share them with the world. Was it worth it? Unless those pics ever get released, we'll never know for sure. But I'm betting on a firm no. Ride of your life. Some ideas are so dumb, even just hearing about them makes you feel slightly less intelligent. One such idea was brought to life in the city of Zevenaar in the Netherlands in June 2020. A young man and his friend, perhaps after watching the televised antics of Johnny Knoxville, Bam Margera and co., decided to tie a shopping cart to a car and go for a ride. Clearly pulling the short straw, one of them clambered into the cart while the other took the much less treacherous role of driver. As the engine roared into life, the cart rider hesitantly stood up in his humble chariot and prepared to feel the wind in his hair. While he was reportedly able to engage in this unconventional style of surfing for a little while, it wasn't long before the cart began to lose stability. Before he knew it, the shopping cart tamer was buckarooed right off, traveling at a significant speed, and landed in a crumpled heap on the tarmac, dying instantly. I could never condone partaking in a joyride of this kind, but if you're dumb enough to insist, at least wear a helmet and protective gear, because as this guy learned in the split second before his annihilation, high speeds, tarmac, and human faces are not a pleasant mix. Is this thing loaded? In June 2020, an incident of such outrageous stupidity occurred, it would seem more at place in a wacky cartoon than in real life. At a birthday celebration in the town of Shahapur in the Indian state of Maharashtra, a 28-year-old man decided to take a look through the party host's belongings. Finding what was quite obviously a very real revolver and mistaking it for a toy, he jokingly pointed it at himself. Sensing no danger whatsoever and committed to the gag, he pulled the trigger. As a gunshot cut through the fun atmosphere of the party, guests poured in from other rooms and saw the aftermath. It wasn't pretty. The guests were left shocked and disturbed by the incident and were forced to confront 3 very important lessons. Firstly, if you own guns, don't leave them lying around loaded when you throw a party. Secondly, don't invite people to your party with less than 3 brain cells. And thirdly, even if you suspect a gun to be fake, never hold it up to yourself and open fire before you've double, triple, and quadruple checked with the owner. Treat every gun like it's loaded, otherwise, at the very least, you may ruin a perfectly good party. And nobody likes a party pooper. Rapid exit. Every once in a while, in the process of accidentally removing themselves from the gene pool in spectacularly embarrassing ways, people actually end up saving lives. For one unlucky man from Somalia, though, saving lives was far from his intention, yet he somehow managed it anyway. The man in question boarded a commercial flight from Abdinati International Airport in Mogadishu, Somalia on February 2, 2016, with diabolical intentions. His plan, it seemed, had been to smuggle a laptop on board which was fitted with a bomb and detonate it mid-flight, bringing the plane crashing down. He succeeded in getting the bomb past security and shortly after takeoff prepared for everyone on board's fiery demise. The terrorist detonated his device and it exploded according to plan. But in a shocking and admittedly kind of hilarious turn of events, he blew a hole in the side of the plane right next to him, which sucked him straight out into the open air. While a couple of other people were injured, no passengers died, and the plane turned around and landed safely back at the airport. All the while, the world's unluckiest terrorist was treated to a nice flight of his own, straight down to the ground at terminal velocity. What was left of him was later scraped off the road near Mogadishu in about as dignified an ending as he deserved. Hammer time! When in doubt, hit it with a hammer. That's the approach one man from the commune of Boltati in Romania seemed to take to life. At least it's the approach he took when investigating a mysterious metal object he found while exploring the fields near his home. As you can hopefully understand, a hammer is far from the perfect investigative tool for such a purpose. But unfortunately, not everyone is fortunate to have the baseline level of common sense you and I take for granted. The metal object in question was a rusty cylinder that looked something like this, which even at first glance should have begun to ring a few alarm bells in his head. But those alarm bells remained silent, and the air was soon filled with other noises instead. First, the sound of metal on metal, as he took the object back to his home workshop and gave it an investigatory whack with his hammer. Then, the sound of an explosion, because the object he'd found and proceeded to hammer was a very old, but still very much active, bombshell from a past battle on Romanian soil. With all the grace and decorum of someone trying to tie their shoes with a jackhammer, the man was blown to smithereens in the most literal sense of the phrase. He wasn't a bright spark in life, but he certainly was in death. Light refreshment. What's your favorite food? Pizza? Pasta? Sushi? Barbecue. Feel free to share yours down in the comments below, but whatever yours is, I'm sure you take great pleasure in eating it. And why wouldn't you? Food is great, but it's more than that. It's essential for our continued survival. Most people never forget this fact of life, but one Swiss woman chose to, well, simply ignore it when she ventured forth on an incredibly questionable spiritual journey back in 2011. After watching a documentary about an Indian guru who allegedly survived for 70 years consuming no food, living off sunlight alone, the woman decided to try her hand at the challenge. Now, you might be thinking, but what if the documentary was lying? And you'd be right to do so, because that tale was almost certainly little more than a myth, or at the very least, an exaggeration, as the whole idea goes against every shred of evidence biological science presents us with. But what does science matter when you have faith, right? Well, that's the viewpoint this woman adopted, and she decided to stop eating and drinking altogether. When that proved too tough, she began drinking water again, but continued to resist food. After a few weeks of the practice, she was found in her apartment, dead of starvation. It shouldn't need to be said, but no matter how much you believe otherwise, the human body needs food to keep living. Once your body runs out of food, it begins digesting itself. Eventually, this stops the vital organs from functioning, and death soon follows. If there's a legitimate way to get around it, the scientific world is yet to see compelling evidence of it. One thing that is certain, though, is that this Swiss woman's death was a failed attempt to make a somewhat pointless statement. But anyway, is anyone else feeling hungry all of a sudden?
Nah.
Big Bad Birdie. Despite what you might believe, dinosaurs still exist. Not in the form of giant T-Rexes, granted, though their current forms can be just as scary. Case in point, this bizarre creature known as a cassowary. Found across Indonesia and northeastern Australia, it's one of the largest birds on Earth, reaching up to 6 feet tall and weighing as much as 130 pounds. If you don't believe my dinosaur claim, just check out their claws. Scary, right? Well, it's those 4-inch long claws that make up the focal point of this next tale of one man's unfortunate, yet avoidable, demise. While cassowaries are certainly fascinating to look at, they're known for being incredibly territorial. This is something one Florida man should have been aware of, considering he bred them on his property near Gainesville. But for reasons unknown, one day the breeder let his guard down while walking in the enclosure housing one of his cassowaries. In a stroke of misfortune, he fell, and seeing an opportunity to attack, the cassowary leapt forth with those dagger-like claws. Had the breeder been smart like this guy, he would have taken something into the enclosure to put between the bird and himself in the event of an attack. Anything to absorb some of the powerful kick's impact, and most importantly, keep those claws away from his vulnerable body would have made all the difference. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The bird overpowered the unlucky breeder and kicked him to death. It's certainly a tragedy and proves that around dangerous animals, letting your guard down even once can be a death sentence. But on the other hand, I would argue that killed by a living dinosaur is a pretty cool thing to have on your gravestone.
I'll give him that.
Digging an early grave. You don't need to look far on the internet to see examples of people with dangerous jobs throwing all safety measures to the wind. Like this guy, who successfully completed his digging unharmed in spite of his very unstable looking DIY support beams. Or this genius, whose choice of propping tools are one sudden movement away from crumbling like breadsticks, with a side of crushed human for dipping. Not everyone is so lucky, however, and it turns out the most dangerous type of support beam is none at all. That was precisely the construction style chosen by one man in 2018 when he decided to dig a tunnel into a sand dune at a beach in St. Augustine, Florida. He wormed his way several feet into the side of the sand dune and seemed to be having fun, until his unsupported makeshift tunnel suddenly collapsed on him. The collapse covered him in several feet of sand, suffocating him, and the sudden shock triggered a fatal heart attack, finishing him off. And that, folks, is why even these types of support beams are better than none at all when it comes to digging yourself out of, or into, trouble. Reptile road trip. No matter how many people fall victim to agonizing and often fatal bites, people just don't seem to get the message to not mess with snakes. Like the bizarre Indian trend of snapping selfies with cobras. Or this Florida man whose decision to kiss a venomous water moccasin temporarily turned his face into a marshmallow. But even those folks are basically Einstein-level geniuses compared to one man from the Kuala Lumpur district of Malaysia who took a wild python for a motorcycle ride in January 2018.
What?
Having passed the 11-foot-long reptile on his return from work, he grabbed a pair of gloves and a sickle from home before returning to catch it. While his motivations for doing so remain unclear, he picked up the snake, holding it by its head to avoid being bitten, and hopped back on his motorbike. Shortly after beginning their road trip, however, the snake began coiling around its chauffeur. Before long, it had constricted enough to pull him off his bike, and despite passersby attempting to pull him free, the python had soon squeezed all of the life out of him. So if you ever take a reptile on a road trip, take it in a nice car. Because if this story is anything to go by, pythons really seem to hate riding motorbikes. Do you know of any local stories of people
What type of bullshit? What?
Out.
For those with a love for the activity, geocaching is a great way to get outdoors and put their exploration skills to the test. The rules are simple. Use some form of GPS alongside other navigational techniques to find hidden geotag containers in the great outdoors. Once the container is found, you sign the logbook inside and hide it ready for the next geocacher to find. Sounds enjoyable, but for 4 geocachers in the Czech Republic in 2018, their lack of common sense turned fun into fatalities. According to reports, weather warnings of storms and torrential rains weren't enough to stop this group heading out on their exploration, which wouldn't be so bad had their destination not been this extremely long underground waterway. I wouldn't even go in there in the sunshine. But the group still ventured in, and when the storm pushed a huge wave through the tunnel, the extent of their mistake quickly became apparent. While 2 of the explorers survived being swept down the tunnel, the other 2 weren't so lucky. Carried away into a powerful river, they soon drowned and were later found washed up along the shoreline. Worst of all, they never found the geocache. Going on a treacherous trip like that, they should have known they were taking a one-way path to geocaching out. Corona Kiss. If you're a normal, sensible person, you probably understand that people with infectious diseases are probably best given some space. But a man from the Indian state of Madhya Pradesh chose to reject this approach completely after he started telling people he could heal illnesses like coronavirus by kissing their hands. Unbelievably, superstitious folk began taking him up on the offer by the dozen. But with the contact between the healer's lips and countless hands, it wasn't long before, unbeknownst to him, the healer caught coronavirus. And with each hand he kissed, he unwittingly began passing the virus on to other people. Ultimately, 19 people were infected after coming into contact with the deluded healer, though they didn't have to wait long for justice to be administered. By the time the 19th person had been diagnosed, the healer had died from the virus. As far as I can tell, no amount of kissing is going to bring him back. And hopefully, nobody tries. Sanitized sipping. With all the delicious drinks available in our modern society, this next story will leave you asking, just why? That's because in June 2020, a number of people in Santa Fe, New Mexico decided to try drinking hand sanitizer, likely as a substitute for alcohol.
What?
Now, it goes without saying that hand sanitizer isn't good for you. But unlike most sanitizers, this particular brand happened to contain methanol, a highly toxic substance. Out of the individuals who were found to have consumed the sanitizer, 1 was left permanently blinded by methanol poisoning, 3 were in critical condition, and 3 more died almost immediately. So unless you want an agonizingly painful death where your insides feel like they're on fire, opt for a tequila shot, not a sanitizer slammer. Eccentric tastes. Ridiculous deaths are nothing new for humans. Indeed, the ability to die in a ridiculous manner seems to go beyond any particular era. This is proven by the story of one man who died on July 14, 1908 in Goldfield, Nevada. The man, whose name remains unknown, was found dead in the street next to an empty tub of library paste. This was a type of glue-like adhesive used to bind paper and was mostly made of water and flour. Apparently being unable or unwilling to acquire an alternative food source, he'd tucked into the paste, eating most of it. Unfortunately though, the batch that this fellow had fished out of a trash can appeared to have turned bad, or possibly even solidified in his body while he ate it. Not that it's advisable to consume library paste in the first place, but this guy's meal choice ultimately cost him his life. His unusual demise is commemorated in a gravestone referred to by Goldfield's locals as the Paste Eater's Grave. While truthfully the guy was probably just super hungry, it doesn't change the fact that this is one seriously embarrassing way to be memorialized. Needing to vent. When the staff at 17th Street Market in Delhi in Knoxville, Tennessee opened up shop one morning in June 2019, they expected a day like any other. However, when they turned the in-store stove on, ready for the day's hot food, they never expected the screaming that began coming from inside the building's ventilation duct. When police arrived soon after, they were able to figure out who the source of the screams were. It turned out a heavily intoxicated man had climbed onto the store's roof the night before and attempted to climb down the vent and into the store. But horrifyingly, the vent proved to be too small to fit through and he became thoroughly wedged. When the morning crew came into work and started the cooker, the heat transferred up the vent, making the metal walls incredibly hot. By the time the police pulled him out, he was already badly burnt and unconscious, and he expired in the hospital a few days later. Whatever's waiting for him on the other side, at least it can't be much worse than the way he went out. Spray paint pariah. You don't have to be smart to be a criminal, but it certainly helps if you're planning to stay alive for a while. But smarts were not the strong suit of a man from South Carolina who robbed a Sprint phone shop back in 2009. Moments before the robbery took place, the man spray-painted the entirety of his face in an attempt at a disguise. Naturally, there's a reason robbers tend to favor balaclavas and masks over this unique approach. Neither of those two other options are lethal to breathe in. And while the burglary itself went off without a hitch, the spray-painted robber began having trouble breathing once it was over. Before long, he was dead, having been choked out by the noxious paint fumes. You'd think it'd be obvious, but if you're getting your robbery fashion tips from this guy, you're asking for trouble. Final trick. If you ever find yourself inclined to make the claim that you're immortal, you should think twice before attempting to prove it. If you don't, you might end up like one psychic medium from Chiang Mai, Thailand. His downfall came during an attempt to carry out so-called proof that he couldn't be killed by plunging a sword into his chest. It transpired that he'd performed this supposedly supernatural feat a number of times before and had made it out alive. But that was only because he was actually a big phony and used swords that were designed to break on impact, making it appear like his skin couldn't be pierced. But when he tried the trick again in April 2017, the weapon failed to break and instead penetrated straight into his chest. Unsurprisingly, the human body doesn't tend to appreciate that sort of thing, and he died shortly after in the hospital, making both his fakery and stupidity public all at once. But at least he didn't have to face the embarrassment, I guess. Fashion no-no. Now, it should obviously be commonly accepted that women can wear whatever makes them feel good. But for one Taiwanese woman in 2019, a slightly more practical outfit would undoubtedly have led to a different outcome than the one she met. Known online as the Bikini Hiker, the 36-year-old made a name for herself hiking mountains around Taiwan wearing only bikinis. While their outfits may have been great for the beach, they don't offer the protection of standard climbing clothes, something the Bikini Hiker learned the hard way on several occasions. But the grazes to her legs she sustained after a tumble in 2018 were nothing compared to the fall she took in January the next year. Hiking alone in Yushan National Park in the snowy coldness of winter, she fell down a ravine and was unable to climb out. She called for help on her satellite phone, but poor weather caused delays in the rescue, and by the time help arrived, she was frozen to death. It goes to show, if you want to get online attention, try to avoid doing something with a high risk of becoming a human ice cube, unless you're the real ice cube, of course. No stealing. When some people leave this mortal coil, they leave behind a mystery so bizarre, it truly does seem stranger than fiction. Like when a resident of Calhoun County, Alabama, spotted a skull in their front yard in 2019. Initially, it was unclear where it had come from, until a burnt to a crisp headless body was found at the bottom of a utility pole, badly decomposed, a fifth of a mile away. Though initially baffled, the police soon put the puzzle pieces together, revealing the utterly crazy truth. The man had been attempting to illegally wire up his home to the street's electricity to get it for free. Unfortunately, though, he didn't seem to have the first clue what he was doing, nor did he understand how dangerous playing around with power lines was. At some point during the attempt, the man made contact with the live wire, shocking himself to death. But how did his head end up so far down the road? Here's the weirdest part of all. The neighbor who discovered the skull claimed his dog has dragged it there, apparently having torn it from the electricity-fried body. Pretty shocking, right? Pain for fame. In the world of online entertainment, it takes a lot of work to make great content and get it seen by as many people as possible. Trust me, I know. And sometimes you have to take risks to reap the rewards. But one Spanish YouTuber tried to reach too high too soon by taking a risk that most definitely didn't pay off. Breaking into a cement factory in the dead of night with a friend, the YouTuber hoped to kick up his numbers from the 6 subscribers he had with an extreme stunt. While wearing a parachute, he climbed to the top of a 165-foot tower, and when the moment was right, he jumped. But disaster struck as he realized his parachute wasn't opening. With nothing he could do, his friend watched on in horror as the reckless attempt at online recognition ended with a loud thud. Ouch. The YouTuber didn't survive, so obviously that's not a good way to get subscribers. But if you're interested in learning more about how to avoid a humiliating demise, subscribing to Be Amazed is the best way to do it. With daily content and regular updates.
sting operation. In life, some of the things we assume are universally understood to be bad ideas are occasionally seen as great ideas by the dimmer folk among us. Like how if I were to ask you to swallow a mouthful of wasp spray, you'd probably think I'd lost my mind. But in 2019, Boone County, West Virginia saw the rise of an alarming trend. People had begun using wasp spray as an intoxicant, and it turned out to be about as safe as you'd expect. While some reports emerged of milder symptoms after use, including extreme swelling and redness of the hands and feet, as well as erratic behavior, other cases were more serious. 3 people died after the harmful spray triggered allergic reactions following repeated usages, proving to whoever was too dumb to see it before. You don't inhale wasp spray. Shouldn't that be obvious? Go-kart departure. When you think of motor racing accidents, you probably picture high-speed sports cars flipping over a load of times. But as this next story proves, not all demises on the track are so morbidly mesmerizing to behold. One night in August 2019 at the Showtime Speedway in Florida, 2 people snuck in and started racing around the track in go-karts. But while zooming along, one of the rookie racers failed to spot a guardrail across the lane he was driving in, and he crashed into it at full speed. Wearing no helmet and with no safety harness on his go-kart, he took the full force of the impact and was later declared dead in the hospital. As far as badass ways to die go, death by go-kart has to be last place over the finish line. Taking a tumble. Sometimes generally smart people make incredibly stupid decisions. And in the case of one Philadelphia medical student, one awful decision came at an extremely high price. For reasons unknown, the student had decided it'd be a good idea to jump between the rooftops around his apartment in the northern side of the city. But after several successful jumps, his luck ran out. On his final leap, he came up short and fell 2 stories to the ground below. Though the fall might have seemed survivable from afar, he hit his head on the way down, which proved fatal almost immediately. The unfortunate incident provides an important lesson. It doesn't always take plummeting from 160 feet for a fall to be fatal, and making the foolish decision to mess around at even a slight elevation can prove fatal. You'd think a medical student would know this, but perhaps he hadn't reached the jumping across rooftops part of the course yet. 'Tis only a flesh wound. Some people love to live life on the edge, like these guys, who captured themselves performing a practice known as car skiing, whereby a car turns sharply at speed, allowing it to drive on 2 wheels. 2 of them even made the brazenly stupid decision to lie in the road during the stunt. While these fellows will likely meet a deadly end if they keep it up, their love of risk-taking hasn't caught up with them yet. But in August 2019, one Brazilian man's disastrously dumb, drunken risk-taking did indeed catch up to him. When he and his friends stumbled across an orange snake with white and black stripes, instead of heeding nature's natural color warning, they did the opposite. With the misplaced confidence only excessive drinking can afford, the man picked up the snake in his bare hands and waved it around, mocking the creature. Reportedly, this was normal behavior for the man, and something he'd often be seen doing after a few too many beverages. But the reptile would have the last laugh because it just so happened to be a coral snake, one of the most venomous species in the world. Eventually, it decided enough was enough and bit the man on the hand. At first, he laughed it off and continued to hold the snake, but mere moments later, he was on the ground fighting for his life as the venom made its way around his body. By the time he made it to the emergency room, it was already too late. I don't know what they taught this guy in school, but I can tell you one thing, first-hand experience is absolutely not the best way of learning about how snake venom works. Don't make a scene. For many people who have done bad things in their life, there's often a turning point at which they begin to seek redemption. On the other side of the coin, some people are total pieces of work right up until their final moments. Like one unpleasant man from Cornamont, France, whose drunken plan to hassle the customers and staff of a kebab restaurant one evening in May 2019 proved a fatal mistake. After shouting obscenities, insults, and threats at the people in the restaurant, he proceeded to punch through the front window, severely injuring himself in the process. His lacerations were so bad that within minutes he was on the floor, quickly growing pale. But even as his final moments of consciousness slowly faded away, he continued his barrage of verbal abuse of the people around him. Going out with a bang is a desire for many people, but I wonder how many hope that bang's followed by the smashing of glass and a dictionary's worth of swear words. French swear words at that. Sacre bleu. Weight problem. It's a very real fear for many people that one day they'll bend over and their pants will split from having gained too much weight. or that a chair will collapse when they sit on it. Of course, neither of those are necessarily fatal. But what one unfortunate Canadian tourist experienced in his final moments in Chiang Mai, Thailand can be described as true fatal embarrassment. Disaster struck for the Canadian when he attempted to ride a zipline across a forested creek. While the recommended max weight for zipliners at the spot was 275 pounds, the man reportedly weighed upwards of 300 pounds. It remains uncertain whether he disclosed his full weight or whether the organizers decided to turn a blind eye to his obesity. But regardless, the outcome proved a man of his size should never have been allowed to take the plunge. That's because the moment he leapt from the platform, the rope and safety locks pulled tight and immediately broke, sending him plummeting 160 feet into the forest below. As you can imagine, it was far from a soft landing and ultimately proved fatal. Of course, the accident wasn't entirely this man's fault. There was clearly some serious negligence on the part of the people running the zip line, but there's no denying being obese enough to snap a harness and fall to your death is one of the most humiliating ends imaginable.
Yeah.
A dangerous mix. It doesn't take a genius to know that mixing flammable compounds together without understanding the effects is an outrageously dumb idea. But unfortunately, that realization never occurred for one man from New Zealand back in 2018. In an attempt to improve the efficiency of his metal welding setup, the man decided to try his hand at a little chemistry. Modifying a gas container, he attempted to mix oxygen with acetylene, a highly flammable gas. Usually, these two are kept in separate containers, though of course that doesn't keep them completely safe when there are fate tempters like this around. But in the case of the New Zealand welder, his DIY redesigned container meant that the usual measures for controlling gas flow and stopping too much oxygen being added were absent. This meant that when he attached a welding torch to the container and sparked her up, boom. In a flash, the shed he'd been working in was flattened to the ground and he was killed in the explosion. Rule number 1 of explosive compounds? Don't use them as your personal chemistry experiment. Questionable cure. If someone commanded you to guzzle down a mouthful of bleach, you'd probably throw it right back in their face.
More than likely.
Unfortunately, religion can make people do some crazy things in the name of faith, as demonstrated by a disturbingly stupid event that occurred in Zambia in 2019. At a particularly faith-focused church, the congregants gathered one April day for what they assumed would be a normal service. But soon their clergyman, who referred to himself as a prophet of God, proposed a new way of purging his congregation of their demons. Insisting it would be an act of faith, he commanded his followers to drink from a bottle of bleach. And with the pressure of their faith overpowering any senses of reason or self-preservation, an alarming number of the congregants drank up right on command. As a result of blindly following a man who, by all means, appeared to be insane, 27 of the churchgoers died, and another 18 were put in critical condition. The lesson here is clear. If your local spiritual leader asks you to do something this dangerous, tell them where to stick it. Call the police and find yourself a new way to worship that doesn't involve guzzling cleaning products. Angle grinder investigation. If on your travels you found a metal object that looked kinda like a bomb, you'd probably get as far away from it as possible, right? Well, when one man from the Pulva municipality of Estonia stumbled across an old rusted cylinder that looked remarkably like an artillery shell, he failed to make the connection. Instead, his curiosity was piqued, and he nonchalantly picked the object up and took it home for investigation. But rather than taking the utmost triggering the thing, his seemingly total unawareness of what it might be led him to a much more invasive approach. Firing up his angle grinder, the man set to work on cutting the thing open to see what was inside. But seeing as the object was indeed a bomb from a war of the past, the inside became the outside very quickly, because it exploded, killing the man. The phrase "curiosity killed the cat" comes to mind, though I don't imagine the person who coined that phrase envisioned the cat being killed in the fiery explosion. But then again, cats don't tend to make the supremely bad decision to cut open bombs with angle grinders. That kind of stupidity is reserved solely for us humans.
A woman dropped her brand new cell phone in an open pit toilet. The woman's husband jumped into the cesspool of feces to retrieve it. Shortly after, the man would lose consciousness. Then his mother jumped in to save him. She too would lose consciousness.
Scarecrow sex doll? Excuse me? Top 10 most embarrassing ways to die, people. And one of them is named Scarecrow sex doll. I gotta watch it now. Let's see this mug.
49-year-old Fagiliu Mukhanetsenov from Kazan, Russia, was falsely declared dead by doctors while at the hospital. The family began praying for her soul by her bedside upon hearing the unfortunate news. Tragically enough, the woman had still been alive until she heard the prayers, which triggered a massive heart attack, this time killing her for good. The husband, Fagiliu Mukhanetsenov, said her eyes fluttered and that she only lived for another 12 minutes. He plans to sue the hospital, which claims to be conducting an investigation as to how the incident came into passing.
Damn.
An American tennis linesman, ironically dubbed Richard Dick Veitheim, suffered a fatal injury during a tennis match at the 1983 US Open. Tennis player Stefan Edberg sent a delinquent serve into the groin of Veitheim while he sat atop his chair officiating at the center line. The blow would knock him backward, out of his chair and onto the hard surface of the court, striking his head. Richard's family would sue the United States Tennis Association for $2.25 million. The Supreme Court would reach an opinion that the tennis ball had not been the immediate cause of death, but simply a factor leading into it, and awarded his estate a mere $165,000 instead.
Damn.
Jose Alberto, or rather the rotting remains of him, were discovered at his home in San Jose del Bacale in eastern Argentina, laying next to a scarecrow customized into a do-it-yourself sex doll, complete with a 6-inch strap-on dildo, lipstick, and long-haired wig. Police responded to a neighbor calling to complain of a foul...
Why would it have long hair like a woman and a penis? What?
Nauseating smell emanating from Jose's house, where they discovered the 58-year-old shepherd lying dead next to the scarecrow. Stating there were no signs of violence, police think the man's heart gave out during the acts. Little is known of the man, as neighbors really only said he was a loner who didn't own so much as a mobile phone. Jose Luis Ochoa attended an illegal cockfight in Central California, and that is where he would die when police raided the event. The spectators fled upon arrival of the police, and during the commotion, Jose would receive a fatal wound. Not from the police, shockingly, but from a wound garnered by a knife strapped to the leg of a rooster. Upon searching the property, police would find 5 dead roosters amidst other evidence pointing to cockfighting, including the body of Jose. It is suspected that a delay in seeking medical attention for the wound could have been the key factor in his death. In 2014, when a woman dropped her brand new cell phone in an open pit toilet, the woman's husband jumped into the cesspool of feces to retrieve it. Shortly after, the man would lose consciousness. Then his mother jumped in to save him. She too would lose consciousness. The now panicking woman would try to jump in and save the two of them, but she as well would succumb to the noxious fumes found therein. Narrowly escaping death, the woman was ripped back to safety by 2 neighbors, who along with the woman would be treated for injuries. The husband and mother-in-law, though, would die of asphyxiation.
Motherfucker, what?
1987. Paul G. Thomas was the co-owner of George Thomas & Sons Textile Company, a wool mill. Paul was operating the pinwheel dresser machine, which was used to spool the yarn to smaller spools, when he fell in and was rapidly covered by 800 yards of yarn. Paul suffocated in the mass before employees of the woolen mill found him. Employees stated that you couldn't even see the guy at all amidst all the yarn. This was presumed to be an accidental death, as no foul play was ever suspected.
Sex with a horse.
Kenneth Pinion, an American Boeing engineer, died in 2005 from injuries resulting from anal sex with a horse. The sex act in question, videotaped by an anonymous friend, would display Pinion receiving anal intercourse from the horse, causing perforation of his colon. He was anonymously dropped off at the Enumclaw Community Hospital, where he would die while waiting in the emergency room. The story was reported by the Seattle Times and became one of the paper's most read stories of 2005. The death would prompt rapid response from Congress, as they would pass a bill prohibiting both sex with animals and the videotaping of the act.
What?
On March 24, 1975, Alex Mitchell would die laughing, literally, after watching Kung Fu Capers, an episode of The Goodies. It's said the reason he passed away was the combination of prolonged laughter, which lasted 25 minutes, and a rare heart rhythm disorder known as long QT syndrome, which triggers cardiac arrests during adrenaline rush or prolonged exertion. His death would be spoken of for years, becoming headline news in most of the papers of his time. He gave a tremendous belly laugh, slumped on the sofa, and died, according to his wife Nessie. She would later write a letter to the Goodies, thanking them for making her husband's last moments enjoyable.
Oh!
Records from Orkneyinga Saga, an ancient book, tell tale of Sigurd Eysteinsson, or Sigurd the Mighty, as he became to be called. He was the second Viking Earl of Orkney and leader in the Vikings' conquest of northern Scotland. Sigurd challenged an indigenous ruler, Malbrigte, the Bucktoothed, to a 40-man battle for control of his lands. Mael, unused to Viking custom, honored the challenge, bringing 40 of his best men to battle what would be 80 of Sigurd's. A slaughter would happen shortly thereafter, claiming Mael's head as a trophy and strapping it to his horse's saddle. Mael's severed head bites Sigurd in the leg as he rode. The resulting infection would claim his life before he could ride home. Bobby Leach, professional stuntman and daredevil of the Barnum and Bailey Circus, and the second person to go ride over Niagara Falls in a barrel on July 25, 1911. He survived the fall, receiving a variety of fractures and contusions in doing so. In 1926, during a publicity tour in New Zealand, Leach would slip on either an orange or banana peel, resulting in a leg injury. The leg would become infected shortly after, and eventually gangrenous, and amputation became necessary. A couple of months after, Bobby would die due to complications from the procedure. This man was able to survive a 170-foot drop, but a measly fall would claim his life.
Garbage day. No one likes having to take out the trash for collection.
Garbage day!
But we don't usually expect to find ourselves carried off alongside our garbage. But for Diego Mata, a combination of heavy drinking and dumpster diving led to exactly that one fateful evening in March 2019. CCTV footage taken on the night in Rosemont, Illinois' entertainment district captured the 31-year-old drunkenly climbing into a dumpster around 4 a.m. An hour later, the garbage truck arrived, tipping the contents of the dumpster, including Mata, into its powerful mechanical jaws. Mata's body was later recovered from a sanitation facility where he was found to have been crushed to death.
Damn!
What a rubbish way to go. That was a dumb death. Water hazard. It seems like common sense that if you don't know how to swim, you should probably learn before doing ocean water sports. Unfortunately, this didn't occur to Jerry Device in July 2019. When he took to the sea in the jet ski he'd purchased mere hours earlier. Despite his desire to have a wild time in the water, Device never learned to swim, so when he lost control and flipped his new toy, he was thrown into serious peril. Within moments, the sea had overwhelmed him and he drowned. When you're in Poseidon's house, it pays to be respectful, because he can be one remorseless son of a titan.
That's
Deadly
real.
hydration. Tina Christofferson was an extremely intelligent woman with a reported IQ of 189. Unfortunately, irrational fear affects even the smartest minds, and a specific fear of stomach cancer was responsible for Tina's demise. She'd seen her mother suffer an agonizing death from the disease, which drove her to obsess over avoiding that fate for herself. She became convinced that she could avoid stomach cancer by intermittently fasting for extended periods, in which she would only consume water. During these fasts, she would drink as much as 4 gallons of water a day. The extended strain of this practice pushed her kidneys into failure, causing water to migrate to her lungs. Despite being on solid ground, the water in Tina's lungs caused her to drown.
Oh my God!
Her neurotic desperation to avoid death had, in fact, killed her. So remember, kids, stay hydrated. But not too hydrated, okay? Black Death dining.
Don't be
Luckily,
racist.
most of us will never have to suffer the disease that wiped out around half the European population in the 14th century. I'm talking, of course, about the Black Death, or bubonic plague, which is caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. The disease is spread by fleas carried by rodents, and while we can treat it with antibiotics now, its symptoms spread fast and are extremely painful, deadly, and highly infectious. Over the years, we figured out that, among other methods, to avoid ending up covered in oozing buboes and gangrene, it helps to avoid touching wild rodents. But not only did a Mongolian couple miss the memo in May 2019, they took their ignorance to the next level by consuming the raw kidney of a rodent known as a marmot. Believing the meat to be good for their health, consuming it actually gave both of them bubonic plague. Not only did they both die, they caused a 6-day quarantine of locals and tourists who had come into contact with the couple. Clearly, there are worse ways to make people suffer from your eating habits than microwaving stanky fish in the office break room. I'd take stinky seafood or pungent cheese over deadly bacterial rodent disease any day. Pain in the neck. On a cold night in September 1927, famous French-American dancer Isadora Duncan was preparing for an evening out in a friend's sports car. On their parting, another friend implored Isadora to put a warm cape over her shoulders as the open-top car would run a substantial breeze during the drive. Isadora decided that some stylish neckwear would be sufficient, so she wrapped a long flowing silk scarf around her neck and was ready to go. The driver began to drive off while Isadora said what would indeed be her final goodbyes. But to the horror of her onlooking friends, the scarf was whipped up in the wind and drifted over the edge of the car. It had soon wrapped itself around the open spokes of the vehicle's wheels and was rapidly pulling Isadora onto a shorter and shorter leash. She was yanked out of the vehicle into the road and under the car. The wheel ran over her neck, breaking it instantly, and she was left wedged in between the wheel and mudguard. A gruesome end and a timeless example of the dangers of putting fashion first. The Bad Boys Burning Bed. Charles the Bad certainly lived up to his name during his reign as King of Navarre between 1349 and 1387. He was a big fan of cruelty, deception, and murder, either carried out by his own hands or those of assassins.
Oh boy, here I go killing again.
But his life of narcissism, backstabbing, violence, and hatred took its toll, and by the time he was 54, his health had deteriorated to a point where he could barely move his limbs. With death looming closer by the day, his doting physicians, armed with the highest caliber of medical knowledge at the time, which basically amounted to nothing at all, tried one final experimental method to restore his health. Like some sickly royal Christmas pudding, they wrapped him up tightly in linen cloth that had been soaked in brandy, hoping the strong alcohol would restore some vigor. Unfortunately, the servant tasked with stitching the linen together found she'd used more thread than needed for the process. But instead of cutting and knotting the extra at the end, she decided to burn it with a candle. The alcohol caught alight and the king went up in flames, burning to death shortly after. Whether the servant was a bumbling idiot or trained assassin, Charles made a fatal mistake in going along with such unusual and hazardous practices. Practices that would leave him more than a little hot under the collar.
I wonder what they did to that female after she did that.
The dangers of fast food. Everybody knows too much fast food is bad for us. But in his last moments on Earth, Charles Wood Jr. of Velda City, Missouri learned the real dangers of the drive-thru experience. Wood placed his order at a local Jack in the Box and pulled up to the collection window. Reaching out of his car window, he realized he was too far away to take his food from the restaurant worker and opened his car door, stretching out to grab his meal. Unfortunately, in doing so, he rested his foot on the accelerator of his car. The car was in reverse and was sent barreling backwards into a tree. Wood was sandwiched between the two objects and later succumbed to his injuries. The lesson here? Never order fast food, especially if you're the type to use...
No, don't eat at Jack in the Box. Chick-fil-A be right down the street. I ain't gonna lie, I do love Jack in the Box's tacos though.
The accelerator as a footrest. Dog's dinner. You'd think that an esteemed, respected philosopher who made great progress in our understanding of what it means to exist would be met with an esteemed, respectful end. But for ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, this was far from the case. Though he had spent his whole life thinking and reflecting, he really should have thought harder about his self-prescribed cure when he developed dropsy. Dropsy involves the accumulation of fluid under the skin and inside the cavities of the body, and is often a symptom of serious lung, heart, or liver diseases. According to sources from the time, Heraclitus came to the conclusion that burying himself in a shed full of cow manure would help draw out some of the fluid by warmth. Unfortunately, Heraclitus was unable to get himself free after hours spent in the dung heap, and in his trapped state was unable to defend himself when a pack of dogs came sniffing around. They devoured him alive, despite the notably pungent aftertaste.
It's a bit nutty.
Oh my God.
Pillow armor.
Oh my
We've all
God.
made up some pretty ridiculous excuses to get out of things, but one Turkish man in July 2019 went way beyond the regular, sorry boss, I'm sick, totally not hungover or anything. After being sentenced to community service for wounding someone in a fight, Zafar Kazoo decided that he just didn't feel like doing it. So he and his friends hatched an, brilliant plan. By strapping 2 pillows to his back for protection and getting his friends to shoot him with a shotgun, Zafar hoped he'd be just injured enough to get out of community service. It worked. He certainly never had to do community service again, because he died almost instantly. On top of that, his friend was injured from the blast too, and was also charged with his friend's murder.
Oh!
Yep, humans can really be that dumb. Holding it in. When you gotta go, you gotta go. It's the opening line of every religious text ever written. Take my word for it. But in 1601, a Danish astronomer and alchemist called Tycho Brahe chose to disobey this great nugget of wisdom. He's mostly remembered for his comprehensive collection of empirical observations about the stars and space, but perhaps the most astronomical thing he ever encountered was the size of his bladder following his final meal. You see, Tycho was a stickler for the rules of being a nobleman. To the extreme. While enjoying a feast, the astronomer found himself needing to use the little boy's room, which was, at the time, little more than a hole in the floor. However, through Tycho's interpretation of nobleman etiquette, he convinced himself it would be incredibly rude to leave the feast for such a vulgar act of urination. So he remained in place for several hours, only to be able to relieve himself on his return home. But he found that he was only able to pee in very short, agonizing spurts. Within a few days, he was dead. Holding it in too long had led Tycho's bladder to burst, resulting in a very painful death. Rather than worrying about both his P's and Q's, perhaps he should have just stuck to the P's. Kill it with fire. In May 2019, a 63-year-old man discovered that his basement was infested with bugs. Fancying himself a bit of a DIY exterminator, he located the source of the infestation and entered the crawlspace with a propane torch in hand. Shooting flames willy-nilly like a dragon with allergies, he soon found that more than the bugs were catching alight. As the flammable materials lining the crawlspace caught alight, he found himself unable to stop, drop, and roll, as the space was far too tight for such gymnastics, and he was burnt to a crisp. In the process, he also caused $60,000 of damage to his house. But hey, at least the bugs are gone, right? Smack talk in the gators. While it's true that some people can't help being stupid, other people are willingly stupid with an infuriating dash of arrogance thrown in. After a 10-foot alligator had been spotted in a Texas marina, staff put up a warning sign. This was not enough to scare off one local man on a night in July 2015, and neither were the repeated verbal warnings issued by a marina employee. The employee looked on in horror as the man responded with, "F the alligators," and jumped straight into the marina. Almost immediately, he screamed out for help, but it was too late. Within minutes, the man was floating, motionless, face down.
So you gonna yell out, "Fuck the alligators," and then jump in, and then expect to scream out for help like I'm supposed to jump in with you? The fuck? Well, that's one of them situations where I grab the nearest mop, start whistling and acting like I'm mopping some shit until he's dead. Oh.
I didn't see that happen.
Someone save him. No. Please stop. Help him.
Down on the surface, dead. Clearly, alligators take profanity very seriously.
What's your profanity?
How to hypnotize an elephant. If you're an animal hypnotist in training, test your skills on your cat, or a neighbor's dog, or even a zoo animal safely behind protective glass. Don't try to hypnotize a wild elephant. It seems unbelievable, but in January 2019, a Sri Lankan man did exactly that. The man was traveling with his family when he spotted the huge animal grazing in a field. He approached the animal, getting its attention, and got closer and closer until the elephant charged. Hoping to hypnotize the elephant back into placidity, the man performed a sudden hand gesture and stood his ground. Unfortunately, this worked about as much as you'd expect. The elephant trampled the man to death while his family looked on in horror. The mistake was clear. He forgot his hypnotist pendant.
Yep.
I'm sure he would have been just fine if he'd started swinging one of those. It's not like giant wild tusked beasts are dangerous after all.
That is.
That's my elephant.
Yep. That's a sad way to go indeed.
leap of faith. In May of 2019, a car chase left a criminal in a tough spot. The Brooklyn man was wanted for a carjacking when he made his first dumb move, crashing into a police car, triggering a high-speed chase. His second and most lasting mistake came later, after the pursuit left him trapped between multiple pursuing police cars on the Brooklyn Bridge. Rather than hand himself over, he went with the Grand Theft Auto method. He assumed that jumping over the railing down to the ground below would allow him to escape with little more than a scratch or two. So over he went, and while he did indeed get away, he did so in a body bag.
Damn.
Remember your roots. There are many embarrassing ways to die, but falling victim to the wrath of a root vegetable has to be near the top.
That's bad.
When out on a hunting trip in 1881, British politician Sir William Payne Galloway entered the annals of ridiculous history when he slipped and fell onto a turnip. The turnip, renowned by his fellow turnips as a violent brute, caused severe internal injuries to the politician, and he died that day, age 74. Turns out vegetables aren't so good for you after all. World's longest breath holder. I could think of better ways to spend a Saturday night than a breath-holding contest, but apparently boredom was at an all-time high for a New Jersey man in August 2018. Rather than holding the competition between friends on the safety of dry land, the man decided to hold his breath underwater on Lake St. Clair in Georgia. 7 minutes passed before anyone noticed anything was wrong. And this time, the undisputed winner of the contest had fallen unconscious and drowned, proving that real winners never give up. Cigarette burns. Hospitals are usually safe places for treatment and recovery, but a questionable decision made by an elderly lady in Haltern am See, Germany, brought a quick end to her own treatment plan in 2018. The lady, who was wheelchair-bound from sickness, wheeled herself outside for a nice, relaxing smoke. She seemed to forget that she was wearing an oxygen ventilator, which ignited when she lit her cigarette, setting fire to the plastic upholstery of her wheelchair. She was engulfed in deadly flames and scorching plastic and died soon after. Everyone knows smoking's bad for your health, but usually its effects aren't so explosive. Not the bees. Picture this relaxing scene. You're lying down on a comfy massage table, enjoying some nice therapeutic music, when someone forcibly stings you with multiple bees. Surprisingly, this is something people willingly go through on a regular basis, supposedly to relieve stress and muscle tension, and is a form of alternative medicine known as live bee acupuncture. All the bees that are used die in the process, but in 2018, they finally got their own revenge. You see, every time a person is stung by a bee, their chances of suffering an allergic reaction increase. But for one woman who was unaware of this fact, her reaction came as a total surprise after having the treatment so many times. The woman immediately lost consciousness following one of the stings, and soon died of a severe allergic reaction. Don't mess with bees. Nick Cage knows this, and so should you. Escalator to heaven. You've heard of the stairway to heaven, but what about the fast track version? The only catch is, you never actually get to the top. This is the fate that met the guitar player from a heavy metal band whose name is so obscene YouTube would implode if I were to say it. A musical career dedicated to causing as much controversy as possible culminated in a rather unclimactic end, when he attempted to ride his way along the rail of an escalator. He lost his balance, plummeted over the edge, and died on impact. His head struck a food court table, presumably turning some unfortunate kid's Happy Meal into a horror meal. Taking selfies to new heights.
Nigga.
Some people go to great lengths for that perfect selfie, but apparently, these great lengths should never exceed 99 feet. The world learned this fact in 2018 when a British woman and her Australian boyfriend were found dead on a beach in Portugal. Piecing the evidence together, police concluded that the couple had been sat atop a 100-foot wall overlooking the beach when they dropped the phone they'd been snapping vacation pics on. They both reached to grab the phone, which had landed on a ledge just below them. Unfortunately, they both lost their balance and plunged the full distance to the ground below. As if to symbolize technology's inevitable takeover of the human race, the phone the couple gave their lives trying to save remained on the wall, unscathed. Trouble in the tub. We're taught from a young age that water and electricity don't mix, but for some people, this never quite sinks in. For some, the comfort of having an electronic device on hand at all times overrides the need to, remain alive. A Londoner learned the error of this mindset in 2017 when he tried charging his phone while in the bath. As he relaxed in the tub, he balanced an extension cord on his chest, keeping it out of the water. What happened next is unclear, but the situation isn't too hard to fathom. Whether he slipped
Common
or whether
sense
he
indeed.
absentmindedly dunked his phone in the water, he was killed by the ensuing shock.
Damn.
Fussy eater. Everybody loves the hearty goodness of a home-cooked
Nigga.
meal, assuming at least one person in the house can cook. But renowned mathematician Kurt Gödel took his love of his wife's home cooking to ridiculous levels. Despite, or perhaps because of, his brilliance as a mathematician, Gödel was an extremely paranoid man. His paranoia grew to the point where in his later years he refused to eat anything that hadn't first been tasted or prepared by his wife.
Excuse
Believing
me?
himself to be at the center of a poisoning plot, when his wife was hospitalized for 6 weeks in 1977 and hence was unable to cook for her husband, Gödel stopped eating. By the end of January 1978, he had died of malnutrition, weighing only 65 pounds when he died. In the end,
Nigga!
through his desperation to avoid being murdered, he was the one responsible for his own death. It
Cook your own food.
This nigga ain't never heard of ramen noodles?
That's what I'm saying.
Sheesh.
The fuck?
really goes to show, if you want something done right, do it yourself.
Oh.
Hungry for more? While some dumb deaths are caused by no eating at all, occasionally someone will kick the bucket because of the total opposite. In this case, the bucket was filled to the brim with sticky, delicious sweet rolls. Adolf Fredrik, King of Sweden from 1751 to 1771, wasn't a particularly good king. He was regarded as lacking the aptitude, fortitude, and integrity necessary for successful kingship. But what he lacked as a king, he made up for with his appetite. He was a lover of food with a sweet tooth, and it could never be said that his eyes were bigger than his belly. But while the amount of food he consumed on his last meal in February 1771 did exceed the limitations of his large belly, he finished it nonetheless. After a heaping feast of seafood, sauerkraut, and champagne, he moved on to dessert. This consisted of no less than 14 Swedish sweet rolls, all dipped in hot milk flavored with cinnamon and raisins. While he was reportedly stockpiling for the Christian tradition of Lent, he clearly overshot his mark as his digestive system completely shut down and he died. Just goes to show, death by cake isn't as sweet as it sounds. A cut above the vest. Nobody wants to be conned when making a purchase. Indeed, being sold a stab-proof vest that offers the protection of a wet noodle is hardly an ideal scenario. But it should go without saying that testing the stabability of such vests should be done with at least one qualifying factor: taking the vest off first. Unfortunately, that first rule of Stab Club whistled in one ear, through the empty skull cavity, and out the other ear of one Englishman in 2018. Mistakenly believing his jacket was stab-proof, the man took a knife and plunged it into his jacket while at the kitchen table. It turned out the jacket wasn't stab-proof, and funnily enough, neither was he. Before I get to the dumbest death magnets of the bunch, let's take a look at some contenders who somehow managed to avoid qualifying for a Darwin Award by surviving their stupidity. This electrician clearly trained with the best, because after all, there's no better insulator than a nice cool puddle of muddy water. Another top-of-the-class graduate of the Elite Electricians Academy is this fellow, who's also in on the secret that water and electricity are actually a great mix. But the rubber industry doesn't want you to know that. For any Darwin Award nominees watching, that was a joke. Anyway, this next close contender seems to be pulling a prank with a fuel-depleted chainsaw heading alarmingly close to his nether region. But the risk-to-reward ratio of this particular prank earns this guy a firm position in the At-Risk Darwin Award Survivors Club. That's just no place for a chainsaw, joke or not. The final at-risk survivor is this fellow who let rage overcome any shred of rational thought. While his friend drives, he takes the noble position of car puncher, hanging out of the car window and attacking the hard walls of another vehicle with his bare hands, like the genius he so clearly is. As his car swerves, he accidentally opens his door and tumbles gracefully onto the highway. Hey, at least he stuck the landing. Though if this is his reaction to a bit of road rage, I feel like his Darwin Award isn't too far away over the horizon. A bridge too far. Video games, movies, and TV shows have led us all to believe that clearing a rising drawbridge in a car is a viable feat. It isn't. But that realization never occurred to a couple of wannabe Texan stuntmen who put their inflated senses of their own abilities to the test in May 2019. Witnesses reported seeing a car's passenger lift the barrier of the Black Bayou drawbridge in Louisiana before the car sped off up the rising ramp. Now, admittedly, some people do occasionally survive these jumps, like this distracted driver who didn't even realize the bridge had begun to rise before cruising over the top to the other side. But these people are the minority and should be taken as representative of the majority, because the majority, like our Texan friends, follow a learning curve that's steeper than the downward path of their car. However, any learning was short-lived in this case, as the Texan pair were trapped in their car after it failed to make the jump to the other side. They sank and soon drowned. Put simply, they were neither fast nor furious enough. Which Darwin Award winner do you think was this?
Who's ever writing this shit is a bad person, bro. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to comment, like, and or subscribe. It's your boy BlastphamousHD. Twisms.